How are you? How you doing? Policy. Policy, take home policy. Take home policy. Device take home policy.
So you don't have to worry about blinding everyone behind you with a dark bald spot like me. So.
Good afternoon again, everyone. So far, the board has participated in a closed attorney-client session and risk management session. We will now move on to our public meetings, beginning with workshops, followed by a special meeting and a meeting of the Palm Beach School Board Leasing Corporation. We will now call the workshop for March 3rd, 2021 to order at 3:17 p.m. Mrs. Bass, please call the roll.
District 1, Barbara McQuinn. Here. District 2, Alexandria Ayala. Here. District 3, Karen Brill. Here. District 4, Erica Whitfield. Here. District 5, Frank Barbieri.
Here.
District 6, Marcia Andrews. Here. District 7, Deborah Robinson. Here.
We have 7 board members present. Assuming the board will make a motion to allow Mrs. Whitfield to attend telephonically. We have a motion by Ms. Brill, seconded by Mrs. Andrews. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Also joining us on our dais is Superintendent Dr. Donald Fenoy, and joining us here at the tables in front of us until they can once again join us at the dais after social distancing requirements are no longer necessary are General Counsel Sean Bernard, Inspector General Teresa Michael, and Board Clerk Carol Bass. Senior staff members will join us periodically as directed by the superintendent. Viewers and listeners can access the meeting today by either watching on Comcast channels 234 and 235, UVerse channel 99, or by using the YouTube link on our webpage at palmbeachschools.org. We also offer a listening-only option which the public can access by calling 561-357-5900 or toll-free at 1-866-930-7015. The meeting ID is 1-561-880-1124 #. This meeting is being transcribed by a closed captioner, so remember to speak at a reasonable pace. Will everyone please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance to be led by Dr. Fenoy. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The board would like to welcome any public speakers who are joining us in person today. While your attendance here at the board office is appreciated, please be mindful of important safety protocols that the district now has in place to conform with COVID-19 safety guidelines. Please respect this cautionary warning that in the event of interference with the orderly processes of the meeting, failure to follow the safety protocols and procedures, or otherwise disruptive conduct, this conduct will result in removal of the person from the meeting. Please abide by these protocols so Palm Beach County School Police officers do not have to take action. Superintendent?
Yes, sir. Before we start our workshops, I want to reiterate to staff, based on all of our rehearsals, that we need you to be concise and disciplined in your presentations today because we have a lot of information to get through. I also would like to ask the board to please try to reserve all of your questions to the end of each presentation so that we can get you out of here tonight in a timely fashion. At this time, I turn over to Dr. Sheffield. Mr. Chairman, I thank you for your support.
Well, good afternoon, board members and Dr. Fenoy. During the onset of COVID-19 last March, the school board supported the successful transition of in-person instruction to distance learning. One of the immediate required actions for this transition was the implementation of a one-to-one student device. This had required us to make certain that all school district students be issued a district-owned electronic device to be used at home or at school if deemed necessary by their parent or guardian. Policy 8.124, titled Electronic Device Take-Home Policy, was developed to govern these electronic devices as they are indeed property of the School District of Palm Beach County. At this time, Dr. Adam Miller, our Director of Educational Technology, will highlight proposed policy 8.124 that will govern the district's devices in which our students are currently utilizing while participating in distance learning. Dr. Miller.
Thank you, Dr. Sheffield. Good afternoon, Mr. Board Chair, Mrs. Chairwoman, Vice Chairman, Ms. Brill, board members, and Dr. Fenoy. It's great to see everyone. As Dr. Sheffield said, thanks to your investment in our students, we now have a one-to-one student-to-device ratio, and now we need a policy to govern that. This policy 8.124 has three main sections. The first section, parent, guardians, and student expectations, covers concepts such as reiterating that all students, when they're using these devices, will follow policy 8.123, which is the technology acceptable use policy for students. The ownership, that, as Dr. Sheffield said, these are the property of the school board. Notification of electronic device procedures, meaning schools will be required to notify their parents of their procedures for these take-home devices, as well as sharing guidelines for students, as well as FAQs for parents on the use of these devices. The second section talks about accountability for these devices. First and foremost, that they will be checked out through a resource manager software. We're using Destiny Resource Manager, similar to that library media specialists use for the library books, and that each school will designate a resource manager who will keep that software up to date, and as well as require periodic device checks, which will be once per grading period. The last section of the policy talks about storage of inventory. It states that we will be that schools would collect these devices at the end of each school year to perform an inventory and update their inventory records. That does create an issue for this summer, because we're probably going to want our students to take our devices home this summer to continue their learning. So I do want to credit Mr. Burke for a really great idea here and just pay that day. On line 114 of the policy, we added in a section that says, in the event of a public health emergency or other extenuating circumstances, the superintendent may modify the annual collection of the devices as needed to facilitate instruction. That will allow us to get this policy, with your approval, of course, passed, but allow flexibility for this summer for student learning. The rest of this section of the policy talks about obligations, if devices are lost, destroyed, or damaged, and notifying parents for that. This policy, the development of this policy was completed by the Department of Educational Technology. We did take language directly from School Board Policy 8.1225, which is the instructional materials accountability policy, as we do consider these instructional materials. We did receive guidance from the board office, and great collaboration, a lot of review by the legal department, as well as collaboration with the divisions of IT, teaching and learning, principal leadership, student wellness, and labor relations. Where we are right now is this is the first part of the workshop for the policy. With your feedback and approval moving forward, we'd bring it back to you on April 7th for development, and then hopefully adoption on May 19th.
Vice Chair.
Thank you. So I know the policy talks about collection of the devices at the end of the year. We in other workshops have been talking about student academic achievement, about summer school. I know we also look at ESY for special needs students. How is that going to impact this policy? If the policy says that we're collecting the devices at the end of the year, shouldn't we be incorporating something in here about students? And then my other concern is that there are a lot of students that will benefit if we give them online programs during the summer if they're able to keep using their devices. And so that's part one of the question, and it gets complicated if you have a student who's going to be moving to another school or another, because they're going from elementary to middle school. So can you talk about that and how we're going to address that?
Yeah, so for the first part of your question, we did build into the policy online, on the policy on line 114, we actually built in a section that does say during a public health emergency or other extenuating circumstances, our superintendent can modify this annual collection. So that way that would give us flexibility for this summer so students can keep their devices and not be in, not work against this policy that will hopefully be adopted by then.
Ms. Ayala, then Mrs. Andrews.
Thank you. I had a question about the piece on the cost that may end up in the family if something were to happen to the device, which is understandable that there should be a provision on that given that it's property. But do we currently have any data on the amount of devices that have had to go in for repair based on the devices that are out in the district?
I'm not aware of those numbers right now, but I can consult with IT and get those numbers to you.
We'll get it to the board office.
That'd be great. The reason I ask is because I wonder how many were and were not covered by warranty, and on different, I know that it's case by case, but on different circumstances, what that amount would look like at the end of the day for a family that would have to cover that, and then thinking beyond that on how we help create an installation for the families that are financially challenged to be able to cover that. Thank you.
You want to know in regards to how many devices came in for repairs?
Yes, and how much of it was covered under the warranty on the device and how much wasn't?
We have that information. Mr. Burke's team has presented it to me, so we'll get it to you.
Great, thank you.
Ms. Andrews?
Thank you. And this policy is a good policy, but I worry a bit because it's just like a lost textbook, but now we have a bigger obligation with the device. And I worry because if a student is not able to return the device or loses the device or the device is stolen, it's a whole lot of money. And I think our past practice, and I don't know if we still do this many times, if they didn't have the device or they couldn't pay for it, they would not participate in activities, And so we've got to be real careful with that because I don't know how we're going to do this. I mean, we've been in COVID and the pandemic, and a lot of things have happened to children over these last few months. So I don't see anything in here with any safeguards. If a parent was not aware that the device was stolen or the child doesn't have the device anymore and nobody has the money to pay for it, what's going to happen? Is it somewhere in here that I'm misreading it?
It's actually not built into the policy. Traditionally, putting my principal hat on, if a student loses a textbook, there's opportunities. Either they lose in activity or they can do some community service. That's built into policy 8.1225, the instruction materials. So that's an option for families.
Good. Okay.
Vice Chairwoman Brill?
Thank you. So years ago, before I was sitting on this side of the dais, I worked with the district so that assistive technology could stay with the student as they progressed through the school district. Is there any reason why we couldn't assign a computer to a student and let that computer stay with the student? I know they're going to need updates to it. It will need to be refreshed. But could we not keep the computer with the student until they it needs to be updated or whatever?
It will, Ms. Burl, and I do understand that, but it's similar to just what the textbooks have there, having to return and how we have to do we're checking devices every marking period, but it's going to be important for them to return them at the end of the year. And like we said, we understand there will be some that's participating with summer school, and we'll make those provisions. That's within the policy. But in terms of it's coming in to where they could be serviced, because, periodically, just like we have to take our cars and so forth, things in to be serviced to keep it going, we just want to have an opportunity to service and do the updates that need to be done here essentially.
I'm sorry, Glenda. I think the other important part is simply this. We can't have 200,000 different times to bring them in for services. So we have to create clear schedules so our vendors and the teams can do it en masse. So we have to have those schedules.
Okay, Dr. Robinson, then Ms. McQuinn.
Thank you. So two of my fellow board members have brought this up, but I want to kind of dive in. And I think you actually mentioned the policy. I was searching for 8.1225 when you said it. So it's not in this draft policy. I think that we need to put maybe we just cut and paste, but similar provisions, if the student loses, damages, whatever, their take-home device. So in terms of the instructional materials, as you said, it's a suspension of extracurricular activities and then community service hours and all, and it's outlined there. And I remember fighting about that because we can't put more barriers in children's way if they are children, and children lose stuff and damage stuff, right? So I would hope that we would look to put similar provisions in this policy. And then the only other comment I had was on line 16 when you talk about the IT user standards and guidelines manual. I looked at that thing. That thing is 25 pages. So I hope you're going to like bullet it or something if you want people to understand what we are saying. It's a lot. I mean, I think we need to find some way to communicate the expectations easier. So thank you.
Of course, thank you.
Ms. McQuinn?
I actually initially raised my hand to thank Dr. Miller and the entire staff for being proactive about the fact that our students can keep their devices, those who need extended learning time. And I want to say right now, I agree with, so going from being a high school principal and trying to collect just textbooks. I know that when I first went to my principalship, I was hit with, you owe us hundreds of thousands of dollars for uncollected textbooks. Now, I negotiated that down, but, and we had a good process in place, but we have to have something, frankly, to hold over kids' heads to return those materials, because we as a board have a fiduciary responsibility, and I'm telling you, it's huge. I can't even imagine the price of our Chromebooks and stuff. Knowing too, though, that at the school center, I know which students need some forgiveness, and ultimately they get that. We have to have confidence in our school leaders to look at individual student situations. But if there is wiggle room, we're not going to get things back, and we can't afford to do that.
If you don't mind, I think it'd be good for the public to know that Mr. Burke and his team have placed tracking devices on all of our machines. So we have had instances since the deployment where machines end up in different places, and we can go get them. So it's just good for the public to know that the team was proactive by putting those tracking devices. So whenever they log onto a network, we know exactly where they are in the world. It's just important for the community to know that.
Dr. Robinson?
So, yes, I remember having these debates about the cost of instructional materials and the fact that, as I recall, it came out of the school's budget if you didn't collect it. So I certainly hope we're not taking that approach with these devices, because I get that we want to retrieve them at the end of the school year unless they're going to be used for summer learning. But I always thought that was unreasonable. But the bottom line is, we have in there that if they don't pay, this is the instructional materials, which I'm proposing transfers over to this take-home device policy. Is suspension of extracurricular activities, and then after that is community service hours. Now, I think that is incentive for young people to find that device, but the truth of the matter is, if they spilled soda on it, they spilled soda on it. And, I mean, that kind of stuff happens. We should not put barriers to education because children did childish things, right? And so I'm all good with trying to hunt it down. If it's lost, track it, use a tracking device. But if it got damaged because children are children, we need to let them work that off and give them another device while they're working it off, because education needs to continue.
Mrs. Anders?
Thank you, and I like this discussion because, like you, Mrs. McQuinn, I was an assistant principal and a principal too. And one of the things I want to make sure, because I'm just so happy every student has a device, that even though we're working through this policy, and maybe this is being done at the school centers as we speak, that we put something out there to parents to let them know how this process works, that, you know, that they have the Chromebook or the laptop right now, and we're going to be checking it off, blah, 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 even though we're working through all of the different phases of the policy. Because I just remember when the pandemic started and the parents were in those long lines. They couldn't go into the building, and they had these few sheets of paper that they had to sign off and take off, get the laptop, and be gone. You know what I'm saying? And many of those children haven't been back to school since, and they've been on remote learning, so, you know, and they got their laptop. So I think there should be some kind of communications with the home about the lap shop, the use, the check-in times and how it works. And if something happens, maybe the parent can get in touch with you at the district before you have to come looking for them. I mean, something happens to the laptop, somebody might be frightened to say, oh my gosh, I've broken this laptop, I don't have any money to pay for it, and I can't tell the school, and I've got to figure out what to do. There should be some user-friendly language somewhere to help parents know if something happens, this is the process, and even if it's lost, this is how we work with you. And if something is going out like that as we work through the policy, I think it's a lot more user-friendly for children as they work through this remote setting. And even when we're outside of this, we're still going to be doing a lot of remote work or work on computers. And so people can know that we're all working together for the education of all children.
Mrs. Whitfield?
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for letting me participate virtually. I don't know why my camera isn't working, so I apologize that I don't have it on. But I wanted to quickly say that I had similar concerns about students and what the ramifications were of this policy going forward. I do think it's important as a school board that we set expectations. So I'm very glad that the policy is in existence, but I would very much like to carry on the practice that I know our schools are doing currently, which is to be understanding and work with our students when they do have an issue. I really recently just heard of a student who's on his 4th laptop at one of my schools, and I think, a couple of accidents here and there, but we really do have to encourage the children to take care of these devices because, it's just an unbelievable gift that this community has given us to have the dollars available to be able to make this happen, to help us get through the pandemic. My question for staff is around the warranty. I understand there is a warranty. I was just curious what kind of things are covered under warranty and what things would not be covered.
So there's a 5-year warranty currently on our Chromebooks that we purchased this last round. IT would have more information on it, but it's any failure of the device itself, as well as the battery, which was really a really good piece of warranty there.
So I'm sorry to follow up. So if we had a soda spilled on it or something like that was an accident, that wouldn't be covered under warranty.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Let me ask you a question, and I'm not sure how it should be decided, but one of the board members said that the school shouldn't be responsible for collecting or being responsible for the cost if those machines aren't brought back. But so I guess we need to know the answer to Ms. Ayala's question, because if there's 180,000 computers out there and 10,000 of them don't come back, and the schools aren't responsible for trying to get them back, the school just says it's not our responsibility and just calls the district office and says somebody try to find this computer. I don't know if that's reasonable to say that the district administration should have to track this down. So I think the schools need to understand that it's their responsibility to try and get this stuff back. And if there's no penalty to that, if they just say, well, we tried, we couldn't get it, too bad, are they really going to try hard enough to get it back? The secretaries in the office know the parents and the kids. They see them walk in every day. They're much more likely to be able to get in touch with a family than an administration that's never had contact with that family at all. So I'm just throwing out for consideration. I don't know what the answer is. I certainly understand that, if the computer's expensive in a school, especially an elementary school that has a very small budget, probably can't handle the cost of 10 or 15 or 20 computers if they don't show up. But there's got to be some incentive on principals, the school site administration, try and get these things back without just saying, we made a call and we couldn't find them, so somebody else take care of it. Dr. Robinson?
So what I said was I didn't think it should come out of their budget. So then it seems that the argument presupposes that the only incentive is the school budget. I think that we can find some other kind of incentive, right? But I think coming out of the school budget then just further harms children. The logic doesn't work for me, right? So I'm good I don't care if we publish in the Palm Beach Post which principals were not able to get their kids to bring the devices back. But to punish by taking it out of their budget is a problem for me, right? So we need to find, it could be peer pressure as far as I'm concerned. Like, I used to get my once a month reports at the VA, green, yellow, and red, on how well controlled, our patients' blood pressure and diabetes was and all that. And we look and say, wow, you sure have a lot of greens. How do you do that? Yeah. There's other ways than just impact on the budget, which then harms children.
Ms. McQuinn?
So obviously, a district of our size, you're going to have accountability at the school level. I see that as a regional superintendent with a principal's evaluation. The school just documents the efforts they made to get the laptops, Chromebooks. In terms of whose budget it comes out of right now, I think that's Dr. Fenoy's responsibility. And then not to come to us and say we don't have any more money because we didn't have anything in place to make sure we recovered them.
All right, I see the logic of not charging the school. I also see the logic of making sure that the school site administration is responsible for trying to make a good faith effort to get it back before just saying I couldn't get it. So, I suppose the regional superintendents will be able to follow up with the principals and say, what did you do to try and find this before it gets turned over to district staff above that level. So, any other questions for Dr. Miller or Dr. Sheffield? I'm sorry, I didn't know if you were finished, yes?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Superintendent?
Yes, sir. At this time, I'd like to have Mr. Mike Burke and Ms. Wanda Paul come forward to speak on our capital plan and the 2016 sales tax update.
All right. Good afternoon. I know we're pressed for time, so I'm going to jump right in. Just change our, do we have our workshop up here? That's not the one. Let's see. Here we go. Is that it? Nope, that's not it. Sorry. All right, thank you. Always a pleasure to be here with Mrs. Paul, our Chief Operating Officer. We're going to split up the presentation today. I'm going to talk about the revenue side and our capital budget and the sales tax collections and some of the technology achievements, and then Ms. Paul's going to get into all the hard work her team's doing to build these schools and complete the various projects. So we just wanted to kind of set the stage. Today's workshop is really to give you an update on the capital program, and the sales tax is a big part of that. So we're kind of talking about all the work that's been done and the work ahead of us, and then we envision coming back to the board in the near future with a capital budget workshop as you start building the budget for next year and updating your 5 and 10-year capital plans. So our capital plan is a big one. Over the next 10-year span, it's going to be just under $6 billion. And the biggest part of that is our 1.5 mil levy that we're still allowed to levy for capital improvements. And then the sales tax represents about 14% of that revenue over the next 10 years. I just want to always kind of remind the public and the board, this slide is one you may remember from when we were building our case to turn to the voters in 2016. And this was really the impetus for the 1 cent sales tax, the local government infrastructure surtax, where we partnered with the county and the cities. And and school boards can also go for a half penny on their own. So that was the conversation back then, but we ultimately decided it was good. Everyone had needs across the county, and we partnered successfully. But what really drove the need for this was during the Great Recession in 2008 and 2009, the legislature reduced the board's local taxing authority from 2 mills to 1.5 mills, or 25% over 2 years. And at the time that was done, we were hemorrhaging money on the operating side. And, you know, Tallahassee, for the last 20-plus years, has been reluctant to raise taxes. So they were forced with increasing the required local effort in the operating tax levy, and they didn't want to come home at the end of the day with a tax increase, so they did a tax shift. And they shifted capital authority to operating authority. And at the time, we kind of welcomed that as hopefully a temporary measure, because we had already lost about $1,000 per student, and we couldn't really afford more budget cuts. What's happened, though, you know, we never got this capital authority millage back. And then over time, the legislature took the stance that the required local effort should be rolled back year after year, so that half a mil was basically kind of lost. You know, it evaporated over time. And that's left a hole in the capital budget, and it's sizable. It's exceeded $1 billion and basically lost revenue opportunities for our district. And that's why you see more and more districts turning to the voters, because we all have pressing capital demands, and this reduction to the millage has really forced people to go to sales tax or to go to bond issues. And that's not going away. This chart just shows real quick, that red line is where we were at before the legislature reduced our taxing authority, and we were bringing over $300 million a year. The green line is where we would have been if we kept 2 mills. And you can see it actually would have dropped a little bit regardless, just because property values plummeted during the recession. But we ended up with was the blue line, which is the 1.5 mil. So we had a double whammy. We lost millage authority, we lost assessed value in the county as property values dropped. And the pain point there is that difference between the red line and the blue line. And we really had to reshape our capital plan, because there was $1 billion or so that was taken off the table. So we've done that. We suffered through that for a while. We got behind on bus replacements and deferred maintenance, and thankfully the sales tax was successful and put us back on a more sustainable path. The good news here is on the sales tax, we're right now, you know, before COVID, we were collecting about 115% of the projection. So we were about 15% to the good. The sales tax collections were coming in, the economy was doing well. We saw, you know, in the immediate aftermath of the COVID and the shutdown, sales tax plummet. You know, in the month of April, we were down to 58% of projection. In April, and then May, it was 79%. In the more recent months, we're at about 105% of projection, which is pretty good. You know, the economy's been pretty resilient in Florida, all things considered. And that 115% we enjoyed before has now slipped to about 113%. And that may continue to kind of get whittled away depending on how fast the economy comes back. So we'll continue to monitor that. The good news here, though, is we're still above projection, and we're actually should bring in a little more money than we planned, unless things really went downhill. One of the questions you may recall, when the board passed this, and along with the county, we included a sunset provision, and this referendum was to generate $2.7 billion in total for both the county, the cities, and the school district, with us getting half of that, or $1.345 billion. And we agreed that if we got to that $2.7 billion early, we would shut the sales tax down and close it earlier than the 10 years that's expected to run. Well, based on the revenue collected and even looking at different scenarios going forward, it does not appear that we will be sunsetting this referendum early. It should run the full 10 years. And the only way that would sunset early is if our collections escalated to 125% of projection for the remaining years. And that's unlikely, or highly unlikely. So we kind of know where we stand. So now it's just a question of where we'll end up after 10 years. We suspect we're going to be to the good. And Ms. Evans, who I should recognize, she'd normally be sitting here right with us because of COVID, we're spreading out. But Ms. Evans has forecasted, if we stay at 105% of projection, we'll be about $108 million to the good at the end of the day. If we can get back to 115% of projections, that's almost $194 million, almost $200 million. And that's going to be important because Ms. Paul's got a challenge, right? That the construction costs have escalated since we started down this path. And we're going to have to be looking for ways to redirect a little extra money here and there to make sure we can keep all the promises that were made as part of that 2016 referendum. This is another way to look at the update. You may recall when we went to the voters, we had a $1.7 billion project list. And $1.345 billion, that was sales tax. And then we were up front, we said, look, we're going to have some new schools we're building, and we're going to borrow money. So we had almost $400 million on top of that in planned local borrowings. And since that time, we've expanded the scope of some of our projects. We went from elementary schools to K-8 schools. The state has increased the cost, what we're allowed to spend per student station, and we have increased the budget. So you'll see that the $1.7 billion plan is now a $1.9 billion plan, with the vast majority of that increase attributed to the new construction projects, which we will be issuing COPS and borrowing for. And you actually have one on your agenda later today to borrow for a few of the upcoming projects. So that's kind of the delta, about $181 million increase in the project plan, and the vast majority of that being funded through borrowings. And then if you look at the expenditure side, we're doing very well. Ms. Paul and her team are knocking out the projects and spending the money, which is what you want. So we've spent nearly $445 million, and we've got another $156+ million that are tied to purchase orders, so that will be spent soon. This is just a quick recap of the capital budget. I showed you the revenue earlier. This is your total 10-year plan in major categories, showing you how much is going to go to retired debt, new construction, deferred maintenance, buses, technologies. It's pretty straightforward. I can't do a presentation without Ms. Evans insisting that I throw this chart in there. This is one of her favorites, but we always like to kind of give the board update on our debt capacity. So this chart, you probably know it better than me at this point, but the green line was where if we still had our 2 mills, we've got a self-imposed debt limit by policy. We try to keep it 50% of our authority. So the red line shows you the value of 50% of the 1.5 mills, and then you see our existing debt are in the bar chart, and that's the gray portion of the bars. And then the blue portions is the new borrowing we expect to issue over the next 10 years. And the good news here is you can see that we expect to stay well below our debt capacity for the next 10 years. And when you get out to 2030 and beyond, the board's going to enjoy considerable room in their debt capacity. So, we always look at this, right, because we want to be mindful of the future, and there's going to be future boards and future staff that are going to be faced with capital needs. And you always, you want to have a plan that you've got debt capacity available should you need it. So just a few positive things to report on behalf of IT and our ed tech teams. A part of the plan was technology, the sales tax. We said, look, we're going to invest $100 million into classroom technology. To support all that technology, the IT team with Mr. Agarwal, they had to shore up our back end, the infrastructure. So they're constantly upgrading equipment, expanding our bandwidth with internet capacity. We are pretty well about 2/3 of the way through a phone system replacement project that was well overdue. And our wireless infrastructure continues to be improved and enhanced, and to some extent extended out into some of the common areas outside of the classrooms. But we're trying to work our best with principals to have some access in, like by the bus loop or where they feel like it's the biggest priority. So that work is all ongoing, but it's going very well. And we also leverage the federal E-rate dollars to pay for a good chunk of this. And then we've heard a lot about the student devices. You're working on the policy, but we've wrapped that up this year. The last of the devices for the CTE programs were distributed. And this picture, of course, is pre-COVID. The kids would now be wearing masks and spaced out, but we didn't have a more recent picture, so I apologize for that. And the classroom technology, I hope you saw the article. Ms. Sonia Isker from the Palm Beach posted a nice article on classroom technology earlier this week that highlighted the fortuitous timing of us deploying the smart panels and the Chromebooks and all of that stuff that Ed Tech had worked on for years through the Trailblazer programs and all that to make sure this technology gets used. And it has really served us well to help deal with some of the unforeseen challenges we ran into this past year. But they have completed ahead of schedule, rolling out all the smart panels. They've got some more training that will catch up with that. And we've spent about half of that $100 million so far on the classroom technology. And the idea is as we get closer to the end of the 10-year plan, we make sure we refresh that technology so that we continue to get, have the benefit of that. So that's just really a positive story. And at this point, we're going to have a little intermission, I believe. And we've got
We're going to get to the cool part of the presentation. So, Mark, if you can roll the video, please. want to thank our communications team and also Tin for putting together that video. I try to provide y'all kind of updated progress on what we're doing out there when we have our one-on-ones. So the next slide.
Ms. Paul, can I ask you a quick
Sure.
question? Maybe with the Education Network already does this. That, if they're not showing stuff like that on the Education Network channel during the day, they should be, because the voters should see what we're doing in the schools. There should be text to it. Obviously, we know what's going on, but those should run like daily on the Education Network so that the voters can see how we're spending their money, so that when we go back to them in the future and ask them for additional funds, they'll realize that we did a great job with the money they have. So maybe the Education Network's already doing that, but I'm just throwing it out just in case it isn't.
You will definitely reach out to the communications team to make sure that's happening. So on with the cool stuff. Here's the transportation update. Purchased 338 buses, replacement buses. The maintenance side of the house, 46 vehicles replaced. School police, 68 vehicles replaced. And with our security funds, we were able to buy an additional 101 vehicles. And you see them around the county and hard at work. Thank God we were able to buy new buses, because I know some of you got tired of seeing the old ones. The next slide deals with our Chuck Shaw Adult Ed Center. Just a beautiful site. A lot of work went into that. I want to also, before I get further in the presentation, thank Dave Dolan, our Deputy Chief of Facilities, as well as Leanne Evans. They're sealed at the hip as we go through this construction program, and I want to thank them for their dedication to the program. The next slide kind of is a cadence of the program. So you can see basically where we are with a lot of our projects by numbers. The next slide will show more detail in it, but to the side of that you can see Verde K-8 and the new school that we have up. Schools with modernizations, that's Washington and Addison Meisner. And then you can also see in planning and design, double P, triple O, which is the high school in Boynton, and 05C, which is the elementary school in Boca. And as you all know, we fought really hard for those particular schools. And then you can see also the security projects as well as the facility renewals and minor projects. So the next slide provides more detail, the projects that were completed, the projects that are in progress. And then also you see the Forest Hill parking lot and the addition. Part of the delay, well, the delay in that is PGA is now interested in the golf course, so we have to work through the city of West Palm. They've been great partners on this, but we have to work through them in order to come up with a plan for the addition and the golf course. So this slide just kind of gives you the detail in schools where they are in the process. The next slide deals with the facility renewal projects. Again, we have a number of things going on at the same time, so it's not just about building new schools. That's a very small part important part of the overall program. But you can see the level of detail that we are going forth with in the facility renewal projects, minor projects that includes replacements of chillers. We also were participated in a new clinic here at Fulton Holland, the construction of that. And then you can also see the 168 digital inclusion projects that we're working with IT as well as Palm Beach County to provide this capability for our schools. Also, you can see with our security projects, single point of entries projects were a big undertaking, as well as adding fencing, card access, and cameras to many of our facilities. To the right, you can see South Tech. We toured that facility last week and saw all the improvements that were made, and just very pleased in the design and the opportunities for students, because they have a really first-class facility. The next slide deals with the cash flow. That's important not only to Mike Burke and Leanne, but to us also to make sure that we have the money in the right position and place when it's time to use the money. The blue bars represent the facility renewal projects, and then you can see the orange bars represent the new schools, modernizations, and addition projects. And so if you turn your attention to 2028, that's when we're closing out our projects, and that's why you see kind of that all orange. And so it is my intent to close out all projects by 2028. There may be a little carryover in 2029. As you can see, our cadence on the program is in a pretty good shape. And again, we have been very aggressive in trying to get these projects done and putting kids in the best facilities we can. The next slide deals with active projects by fiscal year. And again, you can see the ones that are in design, construction, and so forth. So it just gives you kind of an idea of the volume of projects that we're dealing with in numbers. The next slide you can see is diversity participation. We're at 56.2% for project designers and 31.5% of project contractors, and we're seeing a definite uptick in our contractors, SBE and MWBEs, being able to participate in the program. And I want to thank our purchasing department and, of course, Dickie Sykes for making sure that we have that participation. We're definitely doing better together, and so kudos to them for pushing that. Program budget challenges, so the things that are not so cool. The rate of construction cost escalation, that's kind of been a constant throughout the program. Part of it is that we have a strong local economy, and another slide will talk to that, so subcontractors can pick where they want to work. And again, one thing that we have to be aware of is that the FCA projects were priced in 2015, 2016 dollars. We're now in 2021. And so that's definitely part of the challenge. And then, you know, kind of the restrictive timelines. We have a certain amount of time that we can get in the buildings, get out of the buildings. And we work very well with our regional superintendents and our principals to try to schedule the work so that it'll be less intrusive to the kids in the classroom. And again, you can see the Jupiter High School modular classrooms. That was a huge undertaking, and you can see the quality of work with that, and appreciate the team that put that together really quickly. Program budget challenges, again, this is the slide I was referring to. There's a lot of money in South Florida, and contractors and architects can pick where they want to work. And so that kind of presents another kind of challenge for us. We've been very fortunate with a lot of the contractors that we've had and architects. They've been really great to work with, and we hope to continue those relationships. Mitigation strategies. So last March I was supposed to give this briefing to you, and then COVID hit. And so I spoke to you individually about cool, safe, dry, and bright. And these are some of the mitigation strategies that we've used to keep projects within budget and continue the work. Again, you know, it is our intent, as Mr. Burke referred to previously, that we're going to do everything we promised to do. But again, we have to keep the work moving forward. So I want to assure you, if there's a failure of a chiller or something like that, we're going to replace it. We're not going to wait on those kind of things. But this has been a strategy that we've used to help move a lot of the projects forward. And the things that were, you know, may have not been done now are things like painting or striping a parking lot or asphalt on the parking lot. But it's our intent, as I said before, to do those things as soon as we are able to do it. As you can see, there's a $5 million amount of money that was put back in the program because we're negotiating fair and reasonable cost and staffing costs very aggressively with our contractors. So they may call you on some of this stuff, but that's the right thing to do. Another thing that will help us is speed to market, so trying to reduce from the contract award to actual moving into construction, working up with our contractors to do that. And we've made significant improvement in paying people on time. That was one of the challenges when we first started the program. And so we're definitely working to continue to improve that. And again, at the end of this slide, you see all schools will receive repairs and upgrades. So the next slide deals with the accomplishments, excellent safety record. So I was trying to find that song knocking on wood, knock, knock, knock on wood. That's done by Amy Stewart in 1979. I would hope that you would knock on wood on the safety record. We have an impeccable safety record, and we will continue to try to preserve that. And that's a little bit of Mike Burke humor in there. The SBE participation and NWBE participation in design and construction has been exemplary. And we want to continue that with the program. Our outreach program that Dickie and her staff has worked on has been remarkable, and it has helped us tremendously get more people into our program. Again, negotiated fair and reasonable architecture and engineering fees, savings to date close to $1 million. And then you can see the construction management fees and staff and expenses, over $5 million. And then again, the first two modernizations that we did was Verde K-8 as well as Chuck Shaw Adult Center. And we brought those on time, and within budget. And you can see to the right, Pomosa School of the Arts, and then you can see Addison Meisner, the expansion.
All right, so we have two committees that Ms. Paul and I kind of share here. We've got the Independent Sales Tax Oversight Committee that was part of the ballot language, and they continue to meet and oversee all of the dollars coming in from the sales tax as well as the projects. It's a joint presentation with Ms. Evans and Mr. Dolan and the whole team to keep them apprised. And we were supposed to meet Friday, and we are having a quorum challenge, so we're going to have to probably will not get to meet now for a little bit longer, but we'll catch up on any reports and all the activity, even at that meeting as it's being rescheduled.
And the other committee we have is the Construction Oversight Review Committee, CORC, and you've heard a lot about CORC over the years, but I want to thank the CORC members and Mr. Porter for just being very supportive of our program and of our district, and I want to thank you for appointing people that are knowledgeable and understand construction. So again, I think there's a policy again. I know it's a policy coming forward to talk about how we can get CORC back into voting. And so I just want to share my appreciation for having them as part of our team.
All right, so just to kind of wrap up, we're on track, and that's evident by we're at 40% of the revenues collected and 35% of the work has been done, and that's a pretty good ratio. I think Ms. Paula kind of covered the construction challenges, but the expansion of the technology and the classroom tech projects and all that have just proven to be so valuable during this pandemic, and we were really fortunate to be able to be in a good position that we had already had a lot of this work in place, and then we did have to scramble, and buy another 80,000 computers, and we worked through that. But all in all, they also expedited the deployment of the smart panels very quickly. So it was just a great team effort, and we're proud of that. And then, as I mentioned at the onset, we do want to come back to the board with a capital budget workshop so that we can get into a little more detail about what's embedded in the next 5 and 10 years, where the budgets currently sit. I am going to have a little bad news because the property values are not expected to continue to grow 5% a year like we've enjoyed the last several years. That's going to probably fall closer to 2%, and that's going to take a little revenue off the table that was in the plan last year. So we'll have to work through that. If there's areas of the capital budget that we want to increase, we're going to have to work with the board to find a way to offset that and reduce another area of the capital budget. So it will not be easy. Ms. Paul mentioned we did a facility condition assessment in 2015, and that was a stretch where you guys may recall we only had I was doing 2 jobs for a 4-year stretch there. I was CFO and COO, and it is so nice to have company because those were lonely, hard times. And I'm really fortunate. I greatly appreciate having a partner here with Ms. Paul. But what I want to get to is that those studies need to be updated. And when we get to about FY24, we think we need to start planning to do another facility condition assessment. So you're going to see that built into the budget. And that's pretty much it on my end. Ms. Paul, did you have anything to close with?
No, I think you pretty much covered all of it.
All right. Well, great.
So we're open to questions if you have any.
Thank you. So before we go to questions, I just want to make one comment to Mr. Burke. I'm not so sure about those property values because as a realtor, the prices are skyrocketing and properties are not staying on the market for very long. So I'm hopeful that we won't see that decline. But thank you for a very comprehensive presentation. Board member questions? Mrs. Andrews?
I want to thank you for this comprehensive report. It is really outstanding work, Mr. Burke and Ms. Paul. And just a little story about Wellington Elementary, right at the pandemic, we were working so hard to get that modernization done. And everyone had to go home. And by the time we opened the schools back up, it was completed. The parents, the students, everybody. The school was pretty excited. I got a chance to walk through and see all the beautiful school. And just right before the pandemic hit, we saw what it looked like, and all that great work was done. So I really thank you, and I thank you for keeping up with the money and making sure that we stay on task. But this, I think, is something that we want to share with the public, just like the video that we're talking about that should be running all the time. We have some very active community organizations, education advisory boards that are meeting monthly. This is the kind of information, because we may have to go back again. And I want people to know that we're utilizing their monies properly. We have a wonderful oversight committee that's keeping an eye on everything. And we need to let them know how well we're doing. So if that could be something, I don't know if we get a nice, slick something that we can give to people, or we can go and do a presentation. But we've come a long way, and we're doing well. We still have much to do, but keeping people informed about how their monies are being spent on behalf of the children of Palm Beach County, I think that communication is essential. Thank you.
Mrs. Whitfield?
Thank you. I wanted to kind of echo some of those same comments. First of all, let me say thank you to Mrs. Paul and to Mr. Burke for the presentation and just the amount of work that you guys have put into this. It really blows my mind how well we've been able to do this and expend the funds. My concerns are, I visit a lot of my schools and talk to my principals, and I am a little concerned about the things that we promised to the communities based on the money that we brought in. And I know there's been some changes, and I actually really like the way that you presented those changes to make sure that we are putting safety as a priority. I think that's wonderful. But I do think we need to do a good job getting out to the principals and talking to them about the changes that are happening at their schools so that they can be the advocate for making sure that they're talking to the community about why these changes are happening and, hopefully supporting the changes that come forward. I know there's been a lot of, things that they would like to see at their schools that are not on the priority list currently. And so that makes me nervous because, just like everyone in this district, we went around and made a lot of promises to people, and I want to make sure we stick to that as much as humanly possible, or at least give explanations on changes so that our principals can be right with us on the changes that are being made. And then hopefully, I really love, Mrs. Paul, that you said that we're still trying to get to all those projects that we promised to everyone, and I would like to see that happen. But I know from visiting my schools, the list of what they thought they were getting is not completely aligned with what they're currently getting. And I think it's understandable, but we need to do a really good job of explaining it to our principals and making sure that the community really understands that the money is going to school projects, even if those types of projects have been slightly affected. Thank you.
Dr. Robinson?
Thank you. It was a very good presentation. You know, I'm looking for room for improvement, right? So let's start with the slide on diversity participation. Can you just provide follow-up information via email on when that started? Like, what's the time frame for those numbers? Because it says through December 2020, but I don't know where it started. And also the subgroup breakouts, because I can promise you that the Black Chamber does not think that 56.2% of the project designs are representing diversity. So I don't know like who that is, but let's just look at the data. So the other thing is, what is the Seacrest Training Center? So, because we had this plan modification number 88 was on the Seacrest Training Center.
That's a facility that the police department, school police uses.
The school police what?
Uses for training and so forth. It's
Okay.
I saw it the other day. It's across the street from the new Plumosa School you're building.
right. Mhm.
So it's an old building of ours that's now been shared with us and I think a local municipality.
Okay. Yeah. I've seen the building. I just didn't know what we were using it for. I actually thought it belonged to Del Rey, but
No,
okay.
it's ours.
All right. And then can you, this is not urgent, but can you provide us the next time maybe we look at the capital plan on what would it take to upgrade like our HVACs so that we can use the MERV 13 filters and all the other recommendations relative to the pandemic? Because we honestly, I'm sorry to say, need to prepare for the next pandemic, all right?
Okay.
The next spread of respiratory virus. And so, and I don't know if the CARES money that I hope is coming, we can, if we'll have enough to dedicate to that, but I think that we need to address those concerns as soon as we can.
Mhm.
And so I think you bring back to the board, what would that take? What would it look like?
Okay, so I think the question is the systems that are not currently under or have the capability of using MERV 13, where are they located? How many systems do we have in that situation?
Right.
And
Right.
then the dollar value of what it would take
Correct.
to upgrade them to a MERV 13 system or the ability to use MERV 13 filters.
Right.
Okay.
And that was an example. And I hope I don't have to go pull out all my notes that driving me crazy early on about preparing for this situation. But you know that American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, and AC Engineers list all their recommendations, and then there was also some facility recommendations from everybody. Everybody had some. And I think at some point in time, we probably have a list of those precautions relative to the facilities, and there was some we couldn't do, right? And so what would it take to meet those needs in the future is just something I think we need to put on our radar. And then the last point that I want to make is, so, and I'm really glad that you brought up the facility condition assessment, and that you put that on the future radar. Years ago, I don't know how long ago this was now, but we did an analysis that compared, it was almost, we didn't use the word equity, but it was almost an equity analysis. The board talked about its priorities relative to facilities, and we prioritized the facility work, not just based on the facility, but on what I'm gonna now label as equity considerations. I think Mr. Burke remembers that. I remember that Joe Sanchez was the chief of facilities.
Yes.
And it was actually out of that we got those new schools in the Glades, because we didn't use the word equity, but it was equity, right? And so I just want to insert that consideration whenever the time is right for the facility condition assessment and the prioritizing of facility needs, that we make sure that we recognize that that's a point to insert equity work. Thank you.
Mrs. Andrews?
Thank you. As I said, this is great work. I was in Woodlands Middle School just the other day, and I saw the beautiful upgrades at Woodlands Middle School. But when I first started with Pahokee and we were trying to figure out how we were going to get the things done, I just remembered it was a format that you use that could show actually what projects had been completed, which ones are ongoing, from the penny sales tax. And so when I go into the schools, I always ask the principals, how's it going as far as your school and getting the necessary needs met based on the penny sales tax? And they usually say, okay. So do we still have that app where we can actually pull it up and see exactly what projects have been completed for the particular schools?
Yes. Yeah.
Is it updated and everything so that
Yes.
every school, if I'm
Yes.
going to a school, I can ask for that?
Yes,
And
I have David Dolan, give him a chance to speak.
okay, because that's something that's
Since he
wonderful.
sent her-
If we're at education advisory meetings or out in the community, that's what people are asking for is, what are you doing at my school lately, and how is the money being spent?
Yes, and in fact, we do keep an updated monthly status report on all the projects that are being done, and we are linking that with communications department so that they can put it out there in public, so that the general public can access it at any time, see the up-to-date status on a monthly basis.
Yeah, it's on the website.
Yeah, so I think, Ms. Andrews, that's a good point, and I would, so principals have learned that I visit schools on every Friday. Before I leave, I look at their websites where the link is there. So for every principal whose school I haven't visited, it might be in your best interest to read your own website, because I know your information, and you need to know your information as well.
Any other questions? Thank you, Ms. Ball. Mr. Burke, Mr. Superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At this time, I'm going to bring, my glasses, bring forward Deputy Superintendent Keith Oswald, Dr. Glenda Sheffield, Chief Academic Officer, and Mr. Mark Howard, Chief Performance Accountability Officer, to present to the board the 2016 through 2021 5-year strategic plan sunset update.
Okay, the floor is yours.
And good afternoon, board members. Thank you for this opportunity. We're going to jump right in. We have a lot of content to cover. And to get us started, Mr. Howard will take us through just a little history lesson of how we got here today and how we developed this plan, and we'll lead into some of the environmental factors that kind of shifted focus and some of the work accomplished through our initiatives.
Thank you, Mr. Oswald. Good afternoon, board members and Superintendent Fenoy. In 2015, this body, the school board, revised their vision and mission, which served as kind of the guidepost for the development of the strategic plan. And as you know, our vision primarily states that we're about each learner reaching their highest potential. And our mission statement, our way of work, is by building and sustaining a world-class education system with excellence and equity so that we're able to empower each student to reach that potential. This is a timeline. What I just want to remind the board is in 2015, when we embarked on this plan, it was an 8-month process, right? There was extensive stakeholder input and feedback opportunities. At the time, I think we logged over 20,000 stakeholder engagement points. And the result of all of that feedback and that we gathered is this plan. This was our early iteration or expression of the plan. And as you can see on the left-hand side, we identified 4 long-term outcomes, and this was to serve as our North Star. And these very ambitious and aspirational goals are those that the board helped to set. As you can see, 3rd grade reading, 75%, high school readiness, 75%, graduation at 90%, and post-secondary success was at 75%. And in this plan, we agreed that if we organized and developed ourselves in these 4 broad areas across these strategic themes and identified 19 individual projects, which were the initiatives, that's how we would attain these goals. I also see that on your display. Can the board see what I'm presenting? Okay, thanks. Sorry about that. So this was the first long-term outcome, which was reading on grade level by third grade, identifying early literacy as a priority. And this was one where we saw progress through 2018, but we weren't able to reach this particular goal. Within this, there were a number of subgroups that made substantial progress that you'll see. And as you know, in 2020, there was no state assessment administered. In the booklet that we provided you, we gave you estimates based on our own district diagnostic. So you can see some estimated outcomes for 20 and 21. But you'll see here that our black males went from 28 to 37. Our ELL students that were female from 27 to 35. Our ESE kids made nice progress. ESE females 10 points and our males more than that. So there was substantial progress here. Long-term outcome 2 was high school readiness, and in the visionary aspects of this, it wasn't just about achievement. The community wanted to develop also those social, emotional skills that would really enhance what a high school student, the skills that they should have. So this is an index that includes being on grade level in both reading and math. And then a couple of our local measures that we'll go deeper on in just a little bit, dealing with attendance and discipline. As you can see, up through 18, we made a pretty substantial amount of progress. And again, we weren't able to calculate this in 2020 due to the pandemic. And, just point out again, there were some subgroups that made substantial progress, and then some challenges here. Graduation has been, still remains, one of our highest priorities for obvious reasons. And this is a long-term outcome where we're able to attain that North Star, which was 90%. We did that, as you can see, early in 2017, and then have maintained it and increased it through 2020. Last year in 2020, during the pandemic, there was some allowance made for the state assessment requirement, which we've acknowledged. But you can see that as a district, we went up 2 percentage points, and then each of the subgroups, with the exception of our ELL males and Hispanic males, reached 90%. The postgraduate success is very much aligned to our high school accountability framework. It's looking, our goal, and this is what we talk with our principals about, is for every student to graduate on time in 4 years, and when they graduate, have had a successful outcome in a college or career outcome, which includes AP, ACE, IB, dual enrollment, or an industry certification. So they had to have had the opportunity and been successful when they graduate. And what you can see is this has been complemented by our master board development process and a number of other things. And this is an area where there's been very substantial progress for a number of students. The 19 initiatives that were identified, as you know, if you take on 19 new projects in any organization, it's very ambitious. So they were chunked into 3 distinct phases. 8 projects or initiatives in phase 1, 7 in phase 2, and 4 projects or initiatives in phase 3. So we chunked that out over time. How did we manage this work? We used best practices, as you would imagine, a continuous improvement process that included each year doing a SWOT analysis where you're looking at the strengths and weaknesses, opportunities and threats. This process was done with each initiative owner. They identified the key work that needed to accomplish that school year, set measurable goals against it, and had a mid-year check-in. This was important because, as we'll talk in just a minute, there were some pretty significant changes that occurred and the work that you may have had planned for that year, in some cases may have accelerated or had a barrier. And so as part of that SWOT analysis, we also did a SWOT analysis as a system, and Dr. Sheffield will kind of walk us through what some of those changes were.
Thank you, Mr. Howard. And surely within the past 5 years, we celebrated what we call many of our accomplishments and encountered some of our challenges that required our work designed, of course, to shift. And what you're going to see bulleted here is just a few of the events that brought changes within our workspace. As Ms. Paul indicated earlier, the successful passing of the sales tax referendum was definitely a huge success. Adding to this success was also the passing of the millage referendum and attaining, full district accreditation. We all would want that. And then, of course, during this time, we all would remember the unfortunate chain of events surrounding the Parkland tragedy, and currently the implications here of COVID-19. Next slide. And here, as indicated earlier, the successful penny sales tax campaign, which provided us the opportunity for us to complete upgrades to various facilities, which is that awesome video that Mrs. Paul shared, and of course enhance our IT digital infrastructure, and most importantly, in this current space of distance learning and our virtual PDs that we're providing to our teachers and other key stakeholders, the purchase of approximately 11,000 smart panels into all of our classrooms, which were highlighted a few days ago within the Palm Beach Post. And then here on the next slide really talks about, Senate Bill 7026, which was put in place based again on the unfortunate situation there that took place at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas back in February of 2018. And this bill, of course, provided funding for many of our safety and mental health support on our campuses. As you all are aware, we have our mental health professionals, we have our behavioral health professionals on all of our campuses, and our CAPE teams in all 4 of our areas. And this is also where, our asset requirements that Chief Kitzrow heads up take place yearly to ensure that our campuses are indeed safe for our students and our community at large. And as we move on to the to our next slide here that talks about, again, another success, the successful campaign around that increase in our millage rate, which again provided us the opportunity to maintain over 750 plus of our fine arts teachers and our CTE teachers here within our schools. That continuously to be a focus for us in terms of just maintaining quality teachers for our students.
So despite some of those environmental changes, a lot of work was accomplished.
And Mr. Oswald, so he's really ready to get moving to talking about
I was
these,
queued up by Mark.
to talk around these 19 initiatives that he's going to have going on here. As you can tell, we're just excited about this work, right? So just continuing to be excited about the work and around the long-term outcomes in these 19 initiatives. As I mentioned earlier, around the COVID-19 pandemic, which was brought to us, it has brought us many challenges. Here going to be listed some of those, some of the steps that we have taken to allow for a continuation of educational services for our, for our students. And in regards to the kind of services that we are providing and the various instructional deliveries, whether it's brick and mortar and or distance learning. I have to say here, team, for myself, it is always important that I recognize the teachers, the principals, and their leaders on their campuses, and most importantly, our parents and our students. Because this past year, because it will be a year and a few weeks, has been one that has been quite challenging, but I can say very rewarding for us too, as we've learned so many skills and techniques, and some of these things that we've learned that we will continue to do even after COVID, right? But the community has just been so supportive. And I could tell you, as we just continue to look in terms of finding an opportunity and finding some successes within this COVID, with this pandemic, you know, we think about the work that the community has led up with us. When you look at that last bullet there that talks around the digital inclusion and the Wi-Fi projects, we think in regards to, you know, just being able to go out and put the internet, give our families internet accessibilities, you know, working with the various organizations and making sure that our students have the Wi-Fi extenders for those that were having issues, and just getting a very clear signal to where they can participate in their learning. And surely the successes that we have had and the challenges and so forth, we did not take any of this on by ourselves as a district. The community truly embraced and assisted us in many of our efforts. And, you know, lastly here, you know, just the work that we've been able to do in terms of being a district that started the school year with a distance learning memorandum of understanding. And that came from, you know, CTA, Justin Katz and Theo Harris, just coming at the table, working with us continuously with that same mission, that same vision, in regarding to wanting to just set some guidelines and provide some structure for our teachers, and to where it was going to yield positive results for our students. And again, it's just us all having and realizing that it's all about the kids, and there is indeed no playbook to how to navigate in this space of COVID-19. So, you know, at this time, Mr. Oswald now will review the LTOs with these outstanding 19 initiatives. And as he gear up to talk about those 19 initiatives, we all remember that, you know, this is definitely, you know, we definitely have a lot of work to do. But I can say that I've definitely seen the successes, and we also want to just embrace and talk about those opportunities for growth that lies ahead. Mr. Oswald.
Thank you, Dr. Sheffield. And as we move into the 19 initiatives, I do want to put a shout out to the departments, all the employees in the school district here that have done so much work over the last 5 years. I will not do justice of all the work that has been accomplished in these 19 initiatives. As we go through each of them, I'm just going to highlight some of the work in each of these. Understand that we did supply you with a resource that goes into more detail around this work. The 19 initiatives were broken down into 4 themes, the first theme being effective and relevant instruction to meet the needs of all students. The first initiative that we attacked early out the gate was around the pillars of effective instruction. This is about the vision of what we wanted to see in every classroom, that we wanted to make sure that we saw that it was standards-based, that we held high expectations for our students, that we personalized that environment and that experience for our students, and that there was a high level of engagement in every classroom from kindergarten through 12th grade. Our second initiative around cultural competency, equity, and access with instructional practices. Again, a lot of work that's been happening here. Most recently, an Equity Resource Center. That's a website for our employees. That's a one-stop shop around all of the work, from the new work of culturally responsive teaching courses and leadership courses, 5 and 6 at each of those, to lead the work in their schools to address the equity issues that exist in our system. Equity teams, leading courageous conversations at our school centers. A lot of work started that will continue to occur. Number 3, instructional programming customized to the individual strengths, interests, and aspirations of each learner. Here we've had some new work around the AMP program, Accelerated Math Program, where we're condensing 3 years of math into 2 years in elementary school so that more students can take accelerated math as they progress. We've got to continue to expand that in all of our schools around the AMP program. Gifted screeners. We currently have that going on in 35 of our schools. Some of that got put on hold based on the COVID issue. But here we've expanded the number of teachers who have the gifted endorsement. We've got to get that back on track so that we can have the gifted screener happening in all of our schools, our original vision on that piece. Mark talked about the master board process. We've done a lot of work to prioritize the students having access to accelerated coursework. We continue to increase every year the number of students enrolled in accelerated coursework, as well as at the same time executing performance. We need to continue that work. Digital and blended learning opportunities through technology. A lot of that work has been discussed throughout this evening. I just want to highlight the Trailblazer program where our teachers stepped early on. One of the criticisms when instituting technology in the classroom is, does it actually improve pedagogy by our teachers? Well, we attacked that early on, making sure that the technology was partnering with the curriculum team to making sure that was making a difference, and it definitely laid the groundwork when we hit the pandemic, those individuals, those trailblazers leading the training at our school centers. Kindergarten and pre-K, a lot of work has been happening in that space. We started with adding additional $1 million in Title I dollars for the last 5 years into that department to expand direct programming for our students. So a total of $5 million at this point. Also, not only adding and expanding program, what we learned early on, that there's a lot of different providers in this space outside of the school district. So how we collaborated and worked with our outside agency had to be a priority. So work that Dr. Robinson actually started in Riviera Beach around bringing our private providers and community providers together with the district, and how we collaborate and share our resources for better outcomes for our students. That work continues to evolve and be a standard of how we work in the community. That led to the development of the kindergarten KEEs, kindergarten expectations, getting that document wrong, about a document that really looked at what we expected our pre-K students to be ready for kindergarten, from academics to social emotional factors. And lastly, the development, develop the capacity to deliver effective instruction in kindergarten to grade 2. Again, a lot of work happening here. We had a number of curriculum audits from TNTP early on that really addressed the need for better high-quality materials, which led to the development of these curriculum modules that were recently reviewed by Johns Hopkins University, calling out that these were great modules to better making sure that we had standards-aligned curriculum for our students, but also the need for long-term the development of high-quality materials, which is leading into important work as we roll out our next textbook adoption around high-quality materials. In addition, we had a few pilots around content-based literacy. Not only does the literacy need to be standards-based, is the content worthy in helping build knowledge in our students. Next initiative was around positive and supportive school climate. And the first one, ensuring a single school culture in every school. So single school culture 2.0 was rolled out. Here, this was about building systems in each of our schools around academics, behavior, and climate. How did we ensure that there are systems that would ensure that all students would succeed? So, for example, when it comes to academics, professional learning communities is a process that helps teachers come around and talk about good instruction, good lesson plans that will deliver better outcomes for students. There are systems that that have been put in place to build the capacity of that process. If a school is having issues around behavior and climate, school-wide positive behavior support would be leaned in more around making sure that that system at a school is being dealt with. That also led to some work that also, under the talent development, the development of the single school culture coordinators, a position that has helped build that capacity to lead that work in many of our schools. The next initiative, the alignment of behavioral and social emotional factors in our schools. A lot of work has been done in this space, as talked about from our CAPE teams, having a crisis team, the development, again, around talent development and creating career pathway of our behavioral health professionals. An individual, every one of our students, again, thanking our voters out there to support that, to support the needs of our students. This work continues to support our students through the pandemic, and we know will be vital when we come out of the pandemic. We heard early on from our constituents that bullying is an issue and concern that we need to really ensure that we're addressing. So through this work, we revamped our process of how bullying can be reported, how it's investigated, and the training of actual materials and support, which led into the social emotional learning work that's going on in our schools. So from morning meetings to curriculum, this work continues to evolve over time. When we first rolled this out in our social emotional learning morning meetings, something that we hit with a lot of our elementary schools, it was not uncommon to hear students say that was their favorite part of the day, talking about, things that were just going on in life. And aligning new and community and parent resources. Here we learned from the NYU equity audit that, removing the barriers of reaching to our community had to be a priority. So addressing things such as language and issues like that. So we've done a lot of work around developing, revamping our district app, which has 125,000 users, rolling out a number of resources and videos and parent university processes that our supports for our family continue to evolve. And again, additional artifacts under positive and supportive climate. And then talent development. Over the span of this strategic plan, the HR team was recognized with a Sterling Award for its use of data to improve processes that result in improvement in customer service. So under this first initiative, 11 and 17, they were combined for their overlap around how we create career pathways. So I spoke briefly about single school culture coordinators. Another example that also plays out in 12 and 13 is a teacher ambassador program. So how do we retain our teachers at our school centers? Teacher ambassadors received a stipend to really work closely with our new teachers on a school campus to create an area that we know that we often see turnover. So in addition, the NYU partnership residency program helped recruit a number of talented teachers and put them on a pathway to work in our most neediest schools. We saw an increase in the number of Black and Hispanic teachers in our school system by 10% over the course of this work. And again, some of the artifacts that are listed on this slide here. And our last theme, high performance culture. So we started off with implementing a comprehensive performance management system. So again, aligning with talent development, how do we develop our district employees? So there's about 800 employees that do not work directly in school centers that went through a training and process management program to set goals with their supervisors, and then supervisors themselves went through a process to get trained of how do they coach and support these employees around those goals ongoing. So the clear coaching model. Also, Lean Six Sigma is a process to manage projects and reduce variation and waste when implementing a program. This has led to the development of our employees and improvement in a number of processes across the system. Implementing rigorous project management structure, protocols, and processes. Exciting work that's happening here. We now have a project management guidebook and a center. I can tell you this has been well received, especially on the academic side of the house, which often educators are not trained in project management, but often are leading some very important work in our system that this training has helped them, again, execute those particular projects in a much more effective way. 16 and 19, that work has not started. Again, a number of initiatives due to COVID-19 and is work that needs to continue to be looked at as we build district-wide culture of pride and respect and enact systematic customer service. And the last one, develop resources allocation process aligned with student needs. Some of the great work that's coming out there is our new IEP system and English language learner system that is being implemented in all of our schools. As we went through 19 initiatives at a very high level, as we went through this process, as we worked to close out this particular strategic plan, we wanted to really reflect on lessons learned as a school system and work that you'll be engaging in as well of what you have seen around as you all reflect as a school board. But some of the things that we learned is really around the theme of focus, alignment, and accountability. That we've got to narrow our focus as a system so we can align the resources and our efforts to support that focus. And then how do we build a cadence of support but also accountability within that system that this is the work we're going to focus in on. So I just went through 19 initiatives. I hope I didn't put you to sleep. But with those 19 initiatives, we know that there was a lot of work, a lot of resources that had to be expended around a limited number of human capital to execute on that. So reducing the number of initiatives, I think, should definitely be a priority as we move forward. Through our work with engaging the community, we got a lot of support and around the work that's happening as a district. We saw that from the passing of the penny sales tax, the referendum, that we know that we must continue to engage our community. And the limited resources that we have need to focus in on those district priorities and not start new work as this time goes on. Communication, engagement, and transparency around our goals needs to be ongoing all the time so that people understand what we're trying to accomplish as a school system. A cadence of coaching and accountability needs to be established from the school board down throughout all elements of the system to ensure that we stay disciplined on the work that needs to be accomplished. And continuous improvement should be a built-in management process that allows for course correction. We know that at times things weren't working out, whether they were environmental factors or we're just not meeting certain goals, that the work still lies ahead. We need to course correct sooner than later. And there's definitely a difference between technical versus adaptive changes. And there needs to be a built-in greater understanding as people execute on work on how that plays out at the school center as well as the district office. And then I leave you with moving from an equity lens. So we've been very deliberate about bringing data that controls for race, gender, et cetera, and the outcomes of our students. But how do we actually get to the practices that are going to change those outcomes? So we just looked at data that still show disparities in our work, that we need to get to the practices that are going to reduce so there are no gaps amongst the different subgroups in our system. So what are those practices that produce those results? So a lot of work that was just covered. We'll open up the question and answers. Then as we shift into the next workshop, you'll have an opportunity to reflect as well. And Mr. Howard's going to go through additional data elements that we look through. So speaking of looking at data by race, gender, et cetera, we're going to look at a few other elements, but first we'll open up to questions before we move into that segment.
Dr. Robinson.
I was going to wait for everybody else, but okay. So, so first let me just say, I know that everybody is working hard, right? I'm really clear about that. But we are not being anywhere near as successful as I think we can be and that I would hope we can be. And I think at some point, I just think we need to start having harder conversations. Now, I know we will have harder conversations one-on-one, right? But I think we got to get out. Education seems to need more warm and fuzzies than I think we need to have when we're talking about a strategic plan and how to move forward, okay? I'm just saying. So having said that, let me give some of my comments here. So one is, yes, I want all data disaggregated by numerous variables, not a single or two, right? So at the very least, we have to look at race, gender, socioeconomic, ELL, ESE status. I mean, I don't understand, and I would hope that the leadership team is looking at data that way, because otherwise I don't know how we know what we need to do, right? We have always had pockets of excellence in Palm Beach County School District. We have always had groups of students who did well, right? You know, and guess what? They could do better. I think I've shown that data. We can push them to higher levels, the subgroups that tend to do better. But I mean, and I'm sorry, this is probably the most important conversation that we've had in a very, very long time. And so I'm going to say what I need to say here, and I will follow up privately. But so I think that we need to really look at what we said we were going to do. Did we do it with fidelity? And if we did and it didn't work, then we need a new strategy, right? I mean, I think that kind of thought process needs to happen if it has not already, right? And shared with us, shared with the board, so that we can be supportive of the appropriate change. Because we're going to have to make some tough decisions if we're going to do what we say we're going to do. So, you know, I saw in here, in part of the response to one of the strategic initiatives, so we listed the culturally responsive training, we listed the Racial Equity Institutes. But you know what? A one and done is not enough, right? We have not yet put into place the systemic and continuous repeated, the methods to have repeated conversations about what does that look like? What did I learn? And what does that look like in my work, right? It's like if I go to a medical conference and I don't come back and apply it, what I've learned to my patients. I checked it off the list, right? And so, and I've been saying that privately for a while. I'm just saying, I think we need to embed that in our system. So in terms of some of the HR stuff, and I know this is probably an inappropriate request, but I'm going to ask that Ms. Andrews looks at our new teacher support system, because there was a point when Ms. Andrews was our chief of HR. I'm not saying everything was working right, but there was some recruitment and retention initiatives that worked well, right? And so, and I don't think that I have the eyes and background knowledge to adequately evaluate that. So I just want to make a couple more points. Now, this gifted thing set me off, and thank you, Mr. Oswald, for trying to work with me through this. But I just want to make a point, and I'm not even going to go through all my flagged issues, but I want to read something to the board, because, you know, history is important, right? And we had a gifted pilot program in 1998, right, where we had Dr. Donna Ford, I think is her name, from Ohio State University, trained some of our teachers in selected schools. And some of you may remember this. And the goal was to teach teachers how to identify gifted characteristics in Black children. I mean, that was, you know, that's not the dressed up version, but that's what it was, right? With the expectation that then they would identify those characteristics, refer them, and those children would be able to benefit from the gifted program. We said some years ago when Avosa was superintendent that we were going to do gifted screening universally. We're not there. I know we got disrupted by COVID. I heard Mr. Oswald say, you know, that yes, we got disrupted. We're going to do this. But we need to really do this. Now, okay, so I'm going to just say this to you, and then I'm going to stop talking for a minute. I'm reading from a document that's from the Gifted Education Program School Board Workshop dated June 12, 2000. Okay, 2000. Okay? So it opens, equity and excellence. Okay, sound familiar? Equity and excellence, nurturing and developing academic talent in all students, was approved by the school board in January 1999 and forwarded to the U.S. Office of Education, Office for Civil Rights. Included in that report was a recommendation for the development of a continuum of services for gifted students, okay? So, and it goes on and more, but what I'm saying to you is, until I found this, when I was going through one of my gifted files, because I keep mess, right? And this is an issue. And so, and then I dug this out and found this equity and excellence. Oh, how many of us thought that was new terminology, right? So all I'm saying to you is, can we do it this time? I mean, this time, can we actually change the structure of the school system and the behavior of adults to benefit the children that we are paid to serve? Okay? Because there's nothing new except everybody got a device, take-home device. I don't know anything else that's new. We have lost the foundational stuff, the way I was taught to read. We've lost that. We've educated our way out of that. We've specialized ourselves out of that, right? So I'm just saying, now is the time for us to get real. If we're going to outline a new strategic plan, somewhere, can we please, Lord have mercy, have some real conversations about how we support and develop the talents of our children? Because if I'm going to come back here in 20 years and say, we saying the same old crap. I mean, come on. I'm sorry. I said I was going to have my words more organized, but this ticks me off. Palm Beach County School District. Like, so what we get ready to say we're going to do, we already said we were going to do. When we going to do it? I hope it's this time. And so just for the record, so I just want y'all to realize, I am not crazy, okay? All this mess has been said before. And we move the shells around, and the adults come up with the reasons why, and we act like we can't walk and chew gum at the same time, and I'm tired of it. Can we focus on the needs of children like we gave birth to them? Can we do that? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson. I got you in this order. Board members, Mrs. McQuinn, Ms. Whitfield, and Mrs. Andrews.
Okay. First, I want to, for those who don't know out there in the public listening, that Dr. Robinson asked that our data be, I'm going to use reading, be disaggregated, not just ELL, but by race. And I do think that's important because there is a difference between a student who is not a native English speaker, at least our Florida English, and a student who has been with us since birth. I think that's very important information, and probably you guys have it, and I've just missed it. But I do think that's important. The other is just a general statement that I know is going to guide me as I'm looking through what we do next. And that is, and I'm going to be personal for just a minute because I'm going to refer to our Black students. We often talk about, to be politically correct, we talk about high poverty. And we tend to include high poverty white with high poverty Black. I grew up very high poverty white. And I didn't learn how to read at home. I learned how to read at school. Now that's in the old days when I shrugged my shoulders because I didn't know a word and I felt the wrath of a teacher's hand. We would not do that anymore. I learned, there were no books in my home. I learned to read in school, probably because I'm white. A Black student who comes to our school and has been with us since kindergarten, if by the end of third grade they're not performing at the same level as our white students, we haven't done our job. And that's what I'm going to be looking at.
Thank you, Ms. McQuinn. Ms. Whitfield?
Thank you so much. First of all, I just want to say to all the staff out there who've worked on this, this has been an incredibly difficult last year, and you've managed to keep the strategic plan going, which is unbelievable. And I feel like when you look at the level of initiatives that you just presented here, my hat goes off to the people who work in the district, because I'm super impressed with what we've been able to accomplish during this time. Even in the last 5 years, I was around during the development of this plan, so I'm particularly proud of the work that has been accomplished. One of the things that I find a little concerning and want to address for the next strategic plan is that we have the larger objectives that we put together, the long-term outcomes, and they are quantified. We've got a goal of 75%, 70%, 90, 75%, and so we can tell if we've met those or not. But when we have 19 strategic initiatives and you have so many items on that list of things that we've done, it's very impressive, but I don't know that it really gives us a place to say that we've accomplished what we set out to accomplish. There's so many things that contribute to the strategic initiatives, and what I'd like to see in the next plan is, a much more simplified version, so that when we do accomplish something, we know that we've done it and we can pat ourselves on the back, because I feel like this current plan has staff working so hard, but not necessarily finishing anything. So many of these initiatives I see and I want to keep going with. I think that they're really good for the system, and we've done a lot of wonderful things, but as far as a strategic plan, I'm hoping with the next plan that we can have endpoints that really show us when we're done, because I do think staff is working exceptionally hard and they've managed to keep going through this whole thing. But I want them to know when they've done a good job, so we can recognize that and we can tell them, that they have really accomplished what we set out to. But most of all, I just want to say thank you for everybody for continuing this work and making sure that we are doing as much as we are for children. I would like to see some changes coming up in the future, but really I just want to say the part about the end point. I think we need to know when we've accomplished something and when we're done. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Whitfield. Mrs. Andrews, then Dr. Robinson. Go ahead, Ms. Andrews.
Thank you. And first of all, I want to thank Mr. Oswald, Dr. Sheffield, and Mr. Howard for your hard work. And I was here when we did this strategic plan, and I have to look at myself as a board member to say that as we go to the next level, we just got to do better. When I received all this information from Mr. Tierney, this is the most information I had gotten about our strategic plans since we've actually been doing our strategic plan, which was really good, Mr. Oswald and Mr. Howard, the data that you sent us about where our children are. I wasn't surprised at those numbers because, as we kind of look at the superintendent's evaluation and we look at our annual report, we begin to kind of look at that stuff from year to year. But we've got to stop that as a board. We've got to really do a better job in keeping up with where our children are and begin to put our monies and our resources where our mouth is. Because as I look at, just reading on the third grade level, we know that that's going to be a big deal for us because it's a slow process here. And we are not going to make it to even our goals if we don't change how we look at reading. And then when we look at reading, and we look at iReady and some of these other instruments that we use. I mean, back in the day, I had a book. We had curriculum where we could really get some instruction for reading. So something's wrong with the reading. When we look at our ELL children, our ESE children, free and reduced lunch, we know where the black male sits in that situation, and the black females, and those that are just not making it. We know where to find these children. And when I look at the data, it's just showing me the data of how much work that we've kind of made some progress. But we've got to dig deep in that data. When Dr. Robinson brought the information just the other week on graduations, We've done well on graduations, but when we look deep into the data of graduations, we know we got a whole lot of work to do. So I'm just hoping that with this new strategic plan, we're going to dig deep in the data. I really want to know, when we start looking at our reading at the 3rd grade level, I want to know where the schools are. I want to know who are these children that we're missing, that we can't hit the mark on it. And when we kind of find out, and we know they're out there, and we know who they are, we know what subgroups they're in, we probably know what communities they come from. We've got to dig deep to find the students, find the schools, and begin to craft a program specifically for these children that truly need the help. We've got to find them. And I think when we just do the data and kind of lay them out, ELL, ESC, free and reduced lunch, Black, Hispanic, and so on, we already know that. And we're going to continue doing that if we don't dig deep into the data to find out where the children are and begin to hire the teachers, the staff, put the resource there to help those students. So when I look at this data, I'm not surprised that we're making slow progress because we haven't had a deep dive into what we need to do, and we haven't really channeled our resources to work with those individual children. And then I like the idea that we've done some work with acceleration, but we have a long way to go with getting some of these children involved in our high-level programs. So we still have a long way to go, and we need to kind of look at where we're not meeting the needs and work on that. It seems like we're making progress, but we still have a long way to go. And that's why I have to commend Mr. Oswald and your team here. You've been making progress, but now we have to have a deeper dive and cut in there and find out what we're looking for. And just like even with the high school graduation rate, the cohort, a lot of children are graduating. Some of them are going to college. Some of them are being able to get jobs. But we don't really keep up with our children starting even at elementary to make sure that we follow them. So when they get in middle school, that they have some kind of a career track ahead. We got some wonderful career academies, but many of the children that truly need to be in the career academies can't get in there. And so by the time they get to the high school piece, they either may be getting a certificate of attendance, they may just barely be graduating, and then they're on the street with a job that doesn't pay anything. So we've got to do better. But some of them are graduating, but we've got to market and help them. That's why I work so hard for vocational or technical assistance for a lot of the children that are actually coming through the process. And it's the same kids in these same subgroups that we're talking about, because the others are getting picked up in the career academies or being able to go to college or are really ready to go when it's necessary. And then when we're looking at some pieces of it about the certification, I just look at Inlet Grove, where every kid that crosses the stage, for all the years I've been here on this board, and Inlet Grove was a school, every kid that crossed the stage had an industry certification. I says, we have to do that. I mean, we can have a lot of career academies and a lot of kids can cross the stage and give a whole lot of scholarships. But these same kids in this area that you can't move are the ones that we haven't taken care of at a level so that they can be able to move to the next level. When you have a student and you find their interest and they can do better in school and move to the next level because you found something that they like, they're going to do better in the academic piece. So we've got to dig deep. We know where the children are. We know the issues, and we know the subgroups. I just think, I want to look at the human resources piece, Dr. Robinson, but, I just know when we talk about our dual language programs, and we're trying to have international academies, and we can't get the teachers that we need. We have to think out of the box to find a way to bring the right teachers in to do the jobs that's necessary. I just remember the time that the Office of Civil Rights was here in Palm Beach County and told us if we don't get on the ball to make our schools look like our students, that we were not going to get that federal funding anymore. That's when I came along, Dr. Robinson, and the school district had to get busy and hire the right people. And so I just know with all of the excellence that we get, because we're A-rated, a high-performing school district, we have high-performing teachers all over this county. We need to build a partnership in District 6, where I am, with Wellington and Royal Palm Beach and Glades, where there can be some kind of MOU, where you can have an exchange program where we can teach each other. The teachers can work together, and maybe a 3-year stand out in the glades and you go back to your home school. You've got to really think out of the box. And certainly you're going to have to do some international recruiting that Orange County and some of these other counties that are progressive across the United States of America, they're getting those teachers in that need to make a difference, not just somebody that's graduating from college with a bachelor's. I'm talking about with a master's and some experiences so that we can have the right teachers on the ground. So I just know when I look at all of this, I was appreciative of getting this information, but we've got to get something going where we can really monitor and make a real plan and actually look at it, dissect it, and do something with it, putting our monies where our mouth is for resources to make sure that we can take care of our neediest children as well as the children as they move up the level, especially our subgroups, and we're going to see improvement in these numbers, but we've got to spend the time to do it. Thank you.
Dr. Robinson.
Thank you. So it just dawned on me our overarching problem. We have a culture problem, right? We talk about culture and climate at the schools, right? So whenever a parent calls me and says, I don't know if I want my child to go to that school, it's C-rated and all that, and I always say, okay, well, who's the principal? Because then we'll know what the culture and climate is on campus. But we have a culture and climate problem as in the district as a whole with the adults, right? Like the adults don't believe. This is why we are not moving on this is why we have an equity and excellence initiative for gifted that's more than 20 years old that hasn't been acted on because the people who are supposed to make it move don't really believe. I remember when we had a person over math at the district level who didn't believe that those children could be successful in algebra in 9th grade, those children, right? So when you have that, you don't move. It doesn't matter what we say up here, right? If the culture and the climate over in this building and in the schools is not supportive of the children, no matter where they come from or what they look like, we're not gonna move. We need to focus on the culture and the climate, Dr. Fenoy. And part of that is listed here, the culturally responsive training, all that kind of stuff. I hope that our equity consultant can help us walk through some of those thoughtful processes. But let me just tell you an episode that pained me, and then I'll leave it alone for now. So, we have the Superintendent's Advisory Committee for Black Student Excellence, which is the evolution of the Superintendent's Task Force for Black Male Graduation Rate Increase and Suspension Reduction, which was the response to reports from Council of Great City Schools and SHOT Foundation 15 years ago or so. They showed across the nation, people were not graduating black males or were disproportionately suspended black males, right? So anyway, we had this meeting a week ago of what I lovingly call Black Excellence, which is the only time and space in this district that I know of that is dedicated to discussing and debating and advocating for the needs of black children. And the people that were presenting their analysis or recommendations acted like they couldn't say the word black. Wait a minute. We in a space to talk about the needs of black children, right? And you can't say black? That's like if I'm going to a math conference and I want to talk about social studies. So I'm just saying, can we please put the culture and the climate on the top of the list? Because if we don't do that, the people that we count on to carry out all these wonderful things that we imagine, that you put in place to get codified on paper, they're not going to happen because they don't believe. That's our overarching problem. If we remove implicit bias and explicit bias, if we remove that, I'm looking at it positively. I'm removing that. I'm not saying anybody's a intentionalist of any kind. It's a culture problem. We need to fix the culture of the Palm Beach County School District. Thank you.
Vice Chairman Chairwoman Brill.
Thank you. And so, Dr. Robinson, I hope in my lifetime I see the culture change, because I can tell you that you've been involved a long time. I've been involved a very long time. And historically, this district, and it's not you that's sitting in front of us, but this district pushes back on doing things differently. They push back at every turn, even to the point, and I wasn't going to bring this up in the conversation about having a facilitator come in. I was told that it would have been a great idea, but the Council of Great City Schools does it totally differently, and we would have to start all over and do it completely differently. That's the way we operate here. People don't want change. But my takeaway from listening to everybody here is that, Dr. Fenoy, it sounds like once we get that strategic plan in place, I would really suggest that monthly we have an item on our agenda that gives us an update with disaggregated data that tells us where we are, because having the plan in place, and I know that we have our items on the agenda, we identify what part of the plan it is, but we're not getting this data often enough to be able to really see results. We see results, and I appreciate all your hard work, but I do think it will be helpful for us as a group to hear this at least on a monthly basis so that we can see where the problems are. And I agree that it has to be disaggregated. I've asked over and over also to please break out, I hear this from community groups, the Haitian students in the data, because their learning is also very different. Many of them start out as ELL, but it's a different population with different issues, so I would like to see them split out. Kudos to the district. This is the best progress I've seen for ESC over all the years that I'm involved, and it's going back like almost 30 years. So I think we're doing a fantastic job, but I'll just close with that, just with the suggestion that we look at this on a monthly basis and not just put together a nice plan and then come back once a year or twice a year and talk about it.
Board members, let me ask you a question. So you've all had a chance, those of you who want to speak at least once, and I know that a lot of your questions deal with how we should move forward, which is the objective of the next workshop, the Strategic Plan Workshop 2. So at this point, rather than taking any more comments, can we wait until they start the next workshop, and then all of the things that you say we should be doing, we'll be addressing in the strategic plan that we're going to be developing based on the next workshop? That's okay with everybody? And you all are through?
Yeah.
Dr. Robinson?
So just to close out the Owen, I just would hope that if they haven't already, that they have a real, like, heart-to-heart, the executive leadership team, on what did we say we were going to do, what did we do, and did it work? Because I think that's informative.
All right, thank you.
And Mr. Howard's just going to lead into this next with some data that's going to lead into the next strategic work as we transition the other team up.
Yeah, so if I may, Mr. Barbieri, I just want to frame this for the board. The consultant, the expert that you guys have agreed to work with on this equity root cause analysis, Mary, had asked for us to look at certain data elements and to review that with the board. Next week, each of you, my understanding is, will have a one-on-one with Mary. And then following that, a workshop, right? So the data that I'm sharing with you tonight, we're not doing the root cause tonight. My job is to orient you to this data so that you understand it, you can interpret it and apply your own analysis so that you have a great conversation and that you're able to ask informed questions, okay? So the first, and some of these, we've mentioned Council of Great City Schools a few times. Some of these are standard measurements for the Council of Great City Schools KPI project, Key Performance Indicators. So there is a basis for national comparison. I've heard the board say that a number of times. So going forward, that's the potential, right? I also want the board to know that in, as we continue to evolve, improve, and use technology, each of the reports that we put out now have the ability for the user to disaggregate by all the various subgroups and student characteristics, and that's also frequently included in our reporting. So student attendance is the first measure. Let me give you some local context. We're using 11 or more days absent, and you may ask yourself, that seems like an odd number. Why are we using that? In our own research in the school district of Palm Beach County, we found a threshold effect that once a student begins to miss more than 1 day a month, their odds of graduating, if they've missed between 10 and 20 days, drop from 92% to 80%, right? There's this threshold effect. We've also found in other analysis that each day absent tends to lead to one lower point score, scale score on the FSA. So if a student had missed 10 days, their rough learning loss there would be roughly 10 scale points. And once we get at that 11-day threshold, we see negative effects, okay? So this is what we'll look at. Now, we've been looking at this data with you. This is part of our principals dashboard. So in 2016, we established a principals dashboard disaggregated in this way, which is updated daily, right? And so let me orient you to the data. I'm going to use a laser pointer here on your screen, if you can follow me. Now, this is our elementary school students. The first row of each of the tables I'll share with you is in gray and bold, and that's for all students. The first column from the left gives you the group or the subgroup, and then each of the last 5 years. Now, right now it's an extraordinary time because we have pre-COVID and COVID, right? So what you'll see as I move to the right is the difference or the change from 2016 to 2019, which I labeled as pre-COVID, right? And then we have the 5-year difference from 16 to 20. That allows us to pick up any anomalies that might surface. And then, you know, I think it's important that the board will do kind of their own questioning of this data. One of the common ways to look at this, a protocol, is to look at differences between the groups, right? Which group is lowest, which group is highest? What are the differences between groups? Is a group consistently lower, et cetera?
Excuse me,
And
I'm
so,
sorry to
I've
interrupt. Do we have this anywhere here?
Yes, ma'am.
Because I can't find it. Okay, it's in that, okay. Thank you, because I can't see that.
Okay. Yeah, I believe this was an
Okay,
8-1.
I
It was
found
provided
it.
an email
Okay.
from
I
Mr.
saw it was
Oswald,
sent to
and
us. Okay,
I'll
I've
make
got it.
sure, Ms. Brill, that you and
got
all
it.
board members have this deck, and I'm absolutely happy to meet with you personally before you meet with
No,
Mary.
it's fine. I had it printed out, but I can't see that, so.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, you bet. The differences between those groups in 2016 and 2020. And immediately on this screen, you will, when you get this data and you sit down, kind of have your own noticings, right? Things that you notice. And immediately one of the things that I noticed here, that if we look in 2019 or even 2016, on this second row, black females, 23% had 11 or more days absent, 34 for the Hispanic females, which is higher, and 27% for the white females, which is higher yet, right? And now when I track that across, and I go out to 2020, the year of COVID, what do I see? It looks like the black females went from 23 to 36. That's an extraordinary change, right? However, the white females go from 27% to 20. Okay? So when you're looking at this, you may notice things, and that will lead you into your conversation with Mary, and she'll have her own protocol on, you know, what exactly we're doing with it. So that's why we're using 11 days. You can see the subgroups. ESE is special education excluding gifted, right? English language learners are those students who are currently in the program, LY, or those that are being followed up with, right? The 2-year follow-up period. So this is broken out for you. I'm going to go to the next screen now, or the next page in your report, which is middle school. All right? We use the same threshold, all the same context applies, yet you'll see some different numbers. And let's start out with, up at the top left, all students, 13%. What was the number for elementary? Right? It's in the high 20s. So immediately you can see there's a distinction in our elementary schools. And one of the things that we found locally is the problem is worse in K1 and 2 than it is in 3, 4, and 5. That was the focus of our Proving Ground initiative, is to try to understand that and improve upon that. And there's quite a bit to go through, and you have Mr. Tierney following me. So please, if I accelerate, it's not out of disrespect. I don't want to gloss over anything or convey that it's unimportant. It's just you'll have an opportunity to look at these data in detail and then discuss them with Mary and then go over them as a group, okay? But you can see the other thing I just want to note in our secondary schools, this is important. We implemented an SIS system, right? And one of the things that we found is we improved the fidelity of taking attendance. Just because it was easier to do, it was a lot easier for principals to follow up on. So what you'll see between 2018 and 2019 is what looks like a drastic increase in absenteeism, right? And our hypothesis is that from 2016 to 2018, it actually got a little bit better. But in 2019, we changed the way that we kind of collected and reported attendance, and it looked a lot worse, okay? Let's go to high school, which is the next page or the next slide. And then you may find the patterns are similar from elementary to middle or high school, but that's one of the things that you would want to take note of when you're doing your own analysis, okay? So I'm going to move on to the next measure, which is attendance. But before I do, questions about attendance before we go to discipline when you sit down to look at these data. Okay. I'm going to go now to the discipline measure. And the measure that Mary asked for, that is also a Council of Great City Schools measurement, is out-of-school suspension. So we're looking at the percentage of students, elementary, middle, or high, that had been received at least one out-of-school suspension in a school year. Okay? This is elementary. Now we're going to look at all students, this top row, and you can see that in 2016, 2.3% of all elementary students had received at least one out-of-school suspension, right? And you can see in COVID, in 2020, it got a little bit better. And then as you look down, you're going to notice, right, that black males are much more likely to get an out-of-school suspension, followed by special education males and black females. All right? This is a pattern that's well worn in the carpet here, and one that's familiar across the country. No excuses, but that is the pattern, right? And then you'll notice we have female and male free and reduced lunch, and our males that are on free and reduced lunch also, you'll see consistently, right, kind of have that pattern as well. Let's go to middle school. Upper right-hand corner, it was 2.3 for elementary, 9.8 for middle school, and then you'll see it went as high as 9.6, but pretty consistent there from 16 to 19. It's dropped a little bit in COVID. The patterns look very similar. Black males, 20%, right? Here, ESE kids, 15, ELL kids, 13% are males, followed by our black females at 10%. And that pattern is going to present itself again in a high school, okay? All right, I'm going to go to the next measure, but before I go on, are there any questions about discipline? Ma'am? Dr. Robinson.
Not so much a question, but a comment. So in terms of when we dig deeper, so as I recall, and I've said this before after playing with Excel with you, that as I recall, it was like almost 30% of the absentee days for black males in middle school was caused by out-of-school suspension.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I'm just.
I can clarify that. Yeah,
Okay.
You're correct. In 2017-18, when we were looking at this Proving Ground initiative, and I think through a question from yourself, we found that for black males, at least a quarter of their days absent were due to out-of-school suspensions in middle school. That was a middle school fact, okay? So, we ask ourselves, what can we do to impact that? Okay. Any other questions about discipline?
Sorry, Mrs. Andrews, go ahead.
Yes, because I'm really worried about this, and I know this is real, but I just look at these numbers, and we've got to know where is this occurring, because we've got a lot of schools here in Palm Beach County, and when we say black male, Hispanic female, black female, and we look at these numbers, this is accumulation of everywhere in Palm Beach County. I really would like to know if you all, because I haven't seen it, are you digging deep to find out where is, when you get a big number, these big numbers, where is it occurring? It's occurring somewhere, and big numbers to make these large numbers. And we've got to be able to know where that is. And so, I just know in my district, District 6, is it happening in the Glades or is it over in Wellington? Where is this happening? Is it in
just to support you, let you know that you guys, I think, still have access to the principal's dashboard. This is a number on the principal's dashboard that's updated. And then I'll let Mr. Oswald.
But I want to say, I recognize it's on the principal's dashboard, but I think it is going to be the responsibility of the administration to work with the school board members and periodically go through this, because when you have found it, when you dig deep and find that there's trouble, and we know it's trouble in these areas, this is not news to me. When we know it's trouble, and we have to find deeply where the major trouble is happening. And so that's what I'm talking about when I look at these numbers. And when we start talking about equity and what we need to do and how we put our resources, it may not be happening in Wellington. It may be happening in the Glades. It may not be happening in the Glades. It could be happening in Wellington. I don't know where it is when we see these big numbers. And I know that principal's dashboard, somebody's looking at it, but when we see our children in out-of-school suspension or not in school, I need to see, and we need to talk about it as a school board, where it's happening and specifics about that. It's easy to put it here because it doesn't show anything other than it's bad.
Yes.
I want to know where it's bad and why it's bad at the places that it is bad, and what are we doing about it? And that's what I need to know, and I need somebody to help me with that.
Continue, Mr. Howard.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Rowe. The next measure is ninth grade course failures. What I will tell you is our own research shows that by the end of ninth grade, if a student has a GPA below 2.0, they only graduate 56% of the time, right? It's a really significant number. And this is only looking at core courses, English, math, science, and social studies, only ninth grade. And then, so the overall rate in 2016 was 12%. And you say that stayed fairly consistent of 11% in 2019. And we know this is documented, right? There's some struggles when we went out for COVID. We saw that number balloon up for a number of the subgroups, okay? High school graduation, I think this is probably the most well-known to the board and to the public, right? And what you'll see here is, near parity. We have, a couple of subgroups there that are below 90%, but the large majority of our subgroups have reached 90% in 2020. In 2019, our male ELL students and a couple of other subgroups, but primarily our ELL students, have the most work to do yet. And then finally, the last measure that Mary asked for is rigorous courses. And so what we did is we took a look for elementary, middle, and high, because we have slightly different measures in elementary school. We're looking at those students who are enrolled in AMP. In middle school, this is part of our master board process, and we're looking at any advanced or high school courses, and then in high school, ACE, AP, IB, and dual enrollment. And so when we're looking at elementary rigorous courses, right now it's restricted to AMP, and it's looking at students in grades 3 through 5, right? I think there were some other information provided to the board through board questions around gifted and so forth. So, you'll see some differences here between white females and some of the other groups. And that's the other thing I would say as you look at these data, you want to also ask yourself, are there differences between genders, right? Because sometimes there will be. This is what it looks like in middle school. Over 60% of the students in 2021. I think this is worth a shout out because in COVID, with the different learning modes, even in spite of that, our principals did an excellent job, and we still had an uptick or an increase in kids getting into more rigorous courses under these conditions. And it's the same for high school, but you'll see that there are some differences between groups. And I think in order to get on to the next workshop, I'll pause there for questions.
Ms. Brill?
I just have a quick question. I know in the other workshop, the graduation rate was reflected for ESC were standard diplomas. I just wanted to check, is this data ESC students with standard diplomas, or is it including alternative diplomas?
Standard diploma.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Dr. Robinson?
So I just want to ask the board to make sure you look at the Q&A that I submitted for the strategic plan, because one of the things I asked was, what would the graduation rate be without the concordance scores, right? And in every group, I just tried to map it out. It's at least a 7-point differential overall. But like female ELL, if I read this correctly, what we reported is 91%, but it would have been 67%, right? So, the long story short is we learned how to game the system. I'm not mad. I want the children to graduate, but I don't want us to say, check, we did that. And as I showed before, we still have low reading proficiency in 10th grade, so we know we're not getting them ready. So this is wonderful. I mean, it's wonderful, yes, and I report it in public, but it doesn't make me happy because I know that it doesn't mean what I hope it would mean. So let's just think about, really what our new target will be. Thanks.
I think when we have this conversation with our principals, the overall rate is great, but the conversation is around, is that the bar for every student, right? Every subgroup should be at 90%, and that's the expectation and the standard. Okay, and with that, we'll hand off to Mr. Tierney.
Well, the Chief of Staff Office initially began providing the board with details related to the development of our next strategic plan back in November. Along the way, we have heard the board's feedback on the development process, including the need to emphasize equity as a central tenet of our next plan. I applaud the board's efforts to engage in equity-focused workshops moving forward, such as the upcoming root cause analysis discussion facilitated by Mayor Fatakas on March 9th. There is no doubt that this foundational work will be positively influence the implementation related conversations once the next strategic plan has been approved by the board. The Chief of Staff's office has also used your feedback to make meaningful adjustments to project timelines and stakeholder engagement plans, which we will share with you as part of today's workshop. In addition, you will hear more about the critical structures we are putting in place to support the next strategic plan's development. As per the board's feedback, the goals reflected in our next strategic plan must be informed by student needs, as well as input from every stakeholder type, including school-based employees, parents, students, and community partners. We know the sense of urgency to put a meaningful plan in place is now heightened because of COVID. Simply put, we have an obligation to the students and families of Palm Beach County to make strategic investments aimed at repaying the educational debt that is owed to them. It is my firm belief that the sense of urgency must continue to be the driving force in the district's decision-making moving forward. And with that said, I now turn it over to the Chief of Staff, Mr. Ed Tierney, for today's workshop.
Chairman Barbieri, Vice Chairwoman Mrs. Brill, school board members, Dr. Fenoy, very pleased to be here this afternoon to help facilitate the second board workshop on our strategic plan development. Joining me at the table today is Ms. Kathy Villavicencio. Joining us remotely is our equity consultant, Ms. Mary Furtakis. In the last workshop in January, we received helpful feedback from the board that led us to make some adjustments. Those adjustments will be highlighted in this presentation. We've also incorporated some critical structures to ensure that this planning process culminates in the successful creation of an equity-based strategic plan. We'll highlight those critical structures as we go through this presentation. And finally, you've received binders to help you assimilate, reflect on, and organize the massive amount of information that you're being asked to deal with as we go through this strategic planning process. This slide is a recap of the feedback that we've received from the school board and then the actions that we've taken as a result of that feedback. The first piece, time needed to reflect on the current strategic plan. We heard emphatically from the school board that prior to really embarking on the creation of the next strategic plan, that you wanted an organizational focus on the current strategic plan as well as a deep dive into equity. So the workshop that you were just presented by the academic team was in response to that request. The data that Mr. Howard just briefed was in response to Ms. Furtaka's request for data that she uses to gauge the successful implementation of equity throughout a school district. That data that Mr. Howard just presented will be a theme as you have your individual one-to-one meetings with Ms. Furtaka's that you all signed up with beginning tomorrow, as well as the March 9th equity workshop that we have less than a week from now. So that data will drive your conversations individually and then collectively as a board next week. Equity work has to inform the strategic development plan. We adjusted our timeline. Initially, if you recall, we were going to do mission, vision first, then equity, and then strategic plan. A board member observed that if the word equity is going to be found in mission and vision, it doesn't make sense to define it after we've used it. So we've adjusted the timeline around that. And how are we leveraging the use of the outside expertise? We're going to expand on Insight's role and responsibilities, highlight how they're going to help us, touch on the synergy that's been created with our current consultant, Ms. Furtakas, and then just briefly touch on the open communication lines between Insight and our performance and accountability department. This is what we're going to cover today. I've touched on most of it. We'll get deeper into the Phase 1 stakeholder engagement plan later on in this presentation. I do want to highlight number 3, the board reflection activity on the current strategic plan. We are going to present this workshop in a manner that preserves time for the board to have the public discussion regarding the current state of our strategic plan, because this is going to be a start, stop, continue activity where you discuss amongst each other what you want to start, stop, and continue. So we're going to brief this to ensure that we have time for the board to have a meaningful discussion around that area.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Tierney. So as Mr. Tierney just mentioned, we did rearrange some of the foundational work that the board had shared is critically important before we even start developing any aspect of the next strategic plan. So you'll see there, we just reordered some of that on the timeline to just give you a visual of what we're doing. And then we've also called out the root cause analysis that will be happening next week on Tuesday. So again, y'all have talked about the need to take a deeper dive. Ms. Furtakas is on the line as well. She'll be just speaking very quickly to the equity workshops because we want to make sure y'all see there is a connection there. And we're making sure that all aspects of the work are aligning. And then, just built out the strategic plan development timeline a little bit more so y'all could see how we're bucketing that work. So again, the pre-work phase where we're really just reflecting where we're at right now and conducting a needs assessment internally allows us to be able to engage in that foundational equity work. And then we'll move on to the design and implementation phases as next steps. So again, I think a lot of the conversations that we've heard the board have focus a lot around the implementation of the plan. So while the development is super important, the implementation is almost as more, if not more important to ensure that we're meeting some of these goals that we're setting for ourselves. So I know Ms. Furtakas is on the line, so it's been a while since we've chatted with Mary, so just want to check. Mary, are you there?
Yes, I am.
All right, Mary. So, this is our first critical structure that we've put into place to make sure that we can meet the timeline, the adjusted timeline for the next strategic plan. And so that's our first critical structure. It's one of 6 that we'll quickly be covering today, and all informed by your feedback over the last couple months. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Mary so she can just quickly talk through the equity work and how those will inform the implementation of the plan moving forward. Mary?
Thank you so much. Thank you, board members and Dr. Fenoy and staff for having me with you again. I'm very happy to be with you, and there's been a lot going on behind the scenes as we've been preparing for this. And so as you can see on the screen, that we have 3 things lined up for you that's specific to the board's work around the equity part of what you're trying to accomplish. Starting tomorrow, I will be having one-on-one discussions with you going through Sunday. And in the pocket of your binder is the template that I'll be using for our conversations on the root cause analysis, where we will be looking at the question, why do inequities exist in Palm Beach County schools? This is why you were provided with the amount of data that you were receiving, because we're going to be having this one-on-one conversation, walking through that template, and then I will be compiling all of your responses into a document in graphic form for you to be able to see what each other has said, and that will be one of the foundational pieces of our conversation on March 9th, next week. The reason for doing this in the order that they're presented is that looking at your data and looking at your root cause analysis, which gets to system issues, which I've heard many of you refer in the workshops so far today. This will then provide that foundation you're going to need for our second workshop, which is going to be developing your working definition of equity that will be informing the strategic plan, any work you do with your policies, et cetera, as well as your mission and vision revisions. So this is how we're building the pieces in. Each one is building on each other so that you're getting the background information that you need. We've already identified in material that you've previously received what the pre-work will be for each one of these 3 workshops, and you'll be able to see how each of these items we're working on will be rolled into our ongoing discussions.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Vertakis. So again, this is the second critical structure we've identified to help supporting the development of the next strategic plan. And so all of y'all received a binder today. In the first section is actually a copy of that larger document that Mr. Howard went over. And so again, just wanted to make sure y'all had hard copies. Now you'll notice the binder is a little big. That's because we'll be adding to it over the next 6 months. So we will be giving you things. We also have a copy that will stay in the board office in case helpful. So again, we just hope it will be a good reference for y'all, because it is a lot of work and we're throwing a lot of information at you. So we want to be mindful of how we're organizing and presenting that to you. And Mr. Tierney will also share just a Google link. So we'll also house these as a Google folder in case you want to look at them electronically as well. So thank you, Ms. Vertakis. I know you have another meeting to jump to, but I know she's looking forward to March 9th and the one-on-one conversations that are coming up.
The board's very familiar with Ms. Vertakis, her role, less so about Insight, so I'm just going to highlight some of the things that they're going to assist us with as we move forward through this process. The list is on this slide. I'm going to call out, in my opinion, the most important part is facilitating the stakeholder meetings to generate the meaningful feedback and draft goals and associated measures. So they will help us engage and interface with the community and then help us assimilate that feedback to turn into draft goals and measures that ultimately will come back to the board. We've mentioned before that Insight's been doing this for 20 years. They really are leading the nation or national leaders in equity work. Equity's woven through the strategic plans that they have helped created. You have 3 examples of those plans in your notebook that you were provided earlier. I'm going to just highlight one of them, which is Guilford County. There was an award-winning equity-focused strategic plan that board is chaired by Chairwoman Dina Hayes, a co-founder of the Racial Equity Institute that so many of us have attended. So that's in your binder and worth looking at. They're already coordinating with Ms. Vertakis, as well as has started communication with our Performance Accountability Department as well.
All right, so the next critical structure has to do with how we'll be collecting feedback and processing it over the next 6 months to inform proposed goals and associated measures. So phase 1 of stakeholder engagement, as we shared back on January 20th, will be taking place, later this month through mid-April. We're doing that with the board today, the start, stop, and continue, which Mr. Tierney referenced, to collect macro-level feedback. We'll be sending out a very short survey, as well as have paper copies for those folks who may not have access to devices. It'll also be mobile-friendly to kind of just give us their initial start, stop, and continue reflections on the current plan. So again, that'll just be one of those critical structures where we can get that macro level feedback, that high level feedback. And then the board is engaged in a similar activity. Chiefs and their leadership teams have also been engaged in that activity. So again, we have a common thread woven throughout, so everyone's giving the same kind of feedback and really reflecting on the plan and having a chance to give us their thoughts and feelings on that. And then that macro level feedback will go to a steering committee comprised of about 35 individuals that will be pulled from, district staff, principals, teachers, parents, students, our largest unions, community organizations. Again, our current school board policy around the strategic plan 1.06 talks about how the plan will be developed by the community and educators. So want to make sure that we're in line with that. And then also just based on Insight's experience, as Mr. Tierney said, they've been doing this for 20 years. All of the plans that they have facilitated have had this structure because, again, we want to make sure the community participates at the highest level possible. And then the decisions don't really lie in any one place. It's really the community's plan. And then other community groups will be engaged in hosting focus groups as part of the phase 2 engagement, which will happen in May, once the steering committee has some proposed goals and associated measures. And I think it's important to note that as for school board policy, the school board will review everything, provide input on the draft goals and measures, and ultimately will approve, what's put forward. So again, the school board plays a critical role in that process, but want to leverage the community to help us determine our next steps as a district. And I think that's something that the board has made very clear about how important it is to have that voice in this process. So again, all of these kind of feed in together. Insight, as Mr. Tierney said, will be facilitating this. And so again, they're a really critical partner because when we talk about capacity and being able to weave equity throughout the whole plan, they really bring that to the table. And again, we've heard the board say that that is foundational piece that needs to be in that plan, and they will help make sure we do that. And then lastly, it's important to note that these meetings will be conducted in accordance with Sunshine. We will advertise them publicly. They will be broadcast live. They will be recorded because, again, I think, letting people know how that process is going is, again, going to be very important. And then that survey that we have as part of phase 1 will also allow folks to indicate if they would like to be contacted to participate in a focus group as well. So if they don't say it on the survey, that's okay. They can still, be a part of that second piece of the process. But again, just want to make sure we are being forward-thinking in how we design these things so that later on in the process we can circle back with folks and keep them up to date. Wanted to give you a deeper dive in just the strategic plan development timeline. Again, we know that timelines are important for accountability purposes, so this is our 5th critical structure. We're in the process now where we are completing an internal needs assessment. We're doing our reflections. Again, Chiefs has done that with their district leadership teams. Y'all will engage in that today and had some time to do that as a self-reflection using the template that Mr. Tierney sent on February 17th. And then we'll engage the community in that same process, and that includes school-based employees. So we're on the PLA agenda next week to talk through that with principals, talk about how they'll engage their staff at upcoming staff meetings. We'll also leverage, the different departments for some of our school-based staff that aren't necessarily instructional because their voice is also needing to be heard. So whatever newsletters go out from the ops side of the house, we'll include that in there as well. Put the information at our different transportation facilities, things of that nature. But really giving us time in March and April while the board is doing their equity foundational work to reflect. And what's important to know about the focus groups in that phase 2 engagement is not only can we ask them about the proposed goals and the associated measures, but we can ask them about the mission and vision revisions that y'all are working on, as well as the equity working definition. So that's another way that we can have a touch point to engage them in those other critical foundational pieces, so the community knows the work that you're doing and how that is informing the strategic plan. I think, y'all talked about culture. I think building in these processes to the strategic plan development will just enable us to change that culture a little bit more each time. So again, just wanted to put that more specific timeline on your radar and let y'all know that we're tracking to get y'all draft goals and associated measures for review in mid-May. And then late July, early August will be when we come back with those final tweak revisions. And again, there's some time baked into there in case, we need a little bit more, time in late July to do some other minor tweaks. But again, y'all will be informed along the way. Mr. Tierney and I have talked about how we will be doing monthly strategic plan updates now, as well as probably a newsletter or some sort of update in between, because we know that communication is key if we're going to meet the aggressive timeline. So again, just wanted to be transparent about that. And so in blue, you'll see the pre-work. Orange is when we'll be designing the plan, and then the purple or dark, black is where you'll see the kind of implementation. So again, just trying to color code it to give you a better visual there. And then just very quickly, the stakeholder engagement was something we talked about bringing back to you on January 20th when we first came in front of you with our first workshop. And so I really want to commend the stakeholder engagement subcommittee, because we've started to craft an engagement plan that will translate into the different languages. So, being a native Spanish speaker myself, I know sometimes just straight translation, you lose the sentiment. So we're making sure that in everything we develop, the sentiment is still captured. And so you'll see there already the translations underway. So again, I'm really appreciative of the subcommittee's work. And then if you look in your binders, I think it's section 3, you'll see we did make some adds to the subcommittee based on your feedback on January 20th, and those are highlighted in yellow. So just wanted to say again, all of your feedback has really informed the work to date. So just appreciate everything that y'all have shared with us in terms of the next plan. And that's our sixth and final structure. And then as we move to outreach methods, again, we're really leveraging the current touch points we have with the internal and external stakeholder groups. I mentioned PLA. We're hoping to have some community meetings the week of March 29th to bring some eyes and ears to the survey and increase maybe just knowledge of what we're doing with the strategic plan. It's also an opportunity for us to push our We Want You Back campaign. So next week, when y'all are here on March 9th, we may ask if y'all would be interested in participating in some of those meetings and sharing some of the vision and engaging the community. So that would be the week of March 29th, so more info to come there. And then we'll also leverage, Dr. Fenoy's Friday 5 message. We're hoping to launch our survey on Friday, March 12th, right before spring break. So again, I'll be sharing some more of those timelines, but wanted to give you a very high-level overview of how those outreach methods will unfold, because once we hit go, it's going to be pretty quick. So we know how important it is to have these processes and these frameworks in place, so we all understand how things will progress over the next 6 or 7 months. Mr. Tierney, I'm going to kick it over to you so you can just take us to our reflection.
So we've mentioned a couple times that this start, stop, continue activity is how we're going to get feedback from all stakeholder groups. So chiefs have started that process. The board will do that this evening. We'll get that from schools, school-based teams. We're on the agenda on PLA, as Ms. Villavicencio said, students and the community. And that way, with an aligned exercise, we'll get aligned feedback and then actionable items from there. So start, stop, continue is what it looks like, and then this is just to go with the board's belief that we really need to base what we do in the future based on what worked and what did not work in the past. So that's the purpose of this slide. So at this point, I'm going to ask the board chairman if he would facilitate the board's discussion on the start, stop, continue exercise. My suggestion, if to do one at a time, start and then stop and then continue. And Ms. Villavicencio will be taking notes, so you'll see on the screens that that's all going to be in a Google Doc to be kind of analyzed and assimilated later.
And I did try to capture some of the things you were saying in the last board workshop for the interest of time, so this will be shared with you after. But Mr. Chairman, thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Ms. Andrews, if you'd like to go first on the things you'd like the district to start doing?
No, I just have a question for them before we start into that, if that's
Okay,
acceptable.
sure, go ahead.
I just know that it's a tight timeline. It's going to be aggressive work, and I think as a district, you know, when we did the strategic plan with our former superintendent, and we kind of let it sit on the shelf, and nothing happened. You know, even though we knew what it was, and we had occasional workshops here, and we're asking the people in the public to come together. I went to all of those stakeholder meetings and the community involvement and all of that. So we're starting that again, which is going to be pretty aggressive. I just do believe we need to kind of speak up to say that, you know, we're not doing this like that anymore. This next time around, once we get all this data, this information, and do this equity dive to try to help these children to get where we need to go as a district, talking about culture and climate, that we're going to be meeting with these stakeholders often, just like Ms. Burrell just said. We can't wait until it's time for the next strategic plan and come up with a consultant and all of this information and everything's all ready to go and we're going to do this big thing. People will lose confidence in us if we don't talk about that on the front end of getting started again. It was a marvelous plan that was really drawn out with a lot of people. And so hopefully a lot of the same people will come back, but we need to address the elephant in the room somewhat, that where have you been lately as a school district in working through the strategic plan as we got to the end here? And so that's what I just believe. As we work through this, and if we really mean what we say, we have to be honest with all these people that we're asking to come together to help us out to get this done.
Okay, which board member would like to go first on the things you'd like to see the administration start doing? Got Dr. Robinson?
I'll try to answer that next, but first, maybe I just missed it, but did we close out the thought? It seemed like it was closed when it was said, but I still need to answer on the Council of Great City Schools. Was that evaluated, whether or not they can actually facilitate? I get it would cost money, yada, yada, yada. I'm just asking the question because it was brought up and I didn't hear the answer.
We met with a representative from the Council of Great City Schools, had an excellent, very interesting conversation. The issues that came up were it would deviate from past practice. It would not really align with the philosophy of how we work through strategic planning, and I don't think it would fit in with our policy as well. So the way the council has that done is the board does the goals, and that is completely separate from superintendent and staff. So the board sets up meetings with the community, attends those, facilitates those, collects the information, assimilates the information, and then collectively creates the goals, all completely separate from superintendent and staff. Once that's done, then it turns to superintendent and staff who comes with a plan in order to meet those goals. So that's not how we've done it in the past. That's not how we've started. And our policy says the strategic plan will be created by superintendent, educators, and the community. So I'm not sure it would completely align there either. And then when we asked about cost, because you always have to ask, being members, it's $10,000 up front. And if we were to do everything that they asked us or required us to do, then that would be the end of it. If we deviated from any of their requirements, then that we get a bill between $75,000 and $150,000 for not, and that bill would be coming for not following through. The size of our district, I would surmise it's probably closer to $150,000 than $75,000.
Sure.
Okay, so thank you for that information. One of the things that I've learned being on the board and actually going through some of that board member training with Florida School Board Association is how important the whole leadership team is, including, I think they counted as 8, meaning the 7 board members and the superintendent. I actually think it's larger than that. And I also think that collective thought is better than isolated thought. And so, based on your description, I'm good with moving forward as has been outlined. You know, I'm still a little bit concerned about the shortened timeline. I'm willing to ride and see if we can pull this off as long as we go as deep as we need to when we need to, right? So, which might be more of a time commitment for us. So I'm fine with that. So as to what should we keep doing? So can, in that category, can I say what should we keep doing but do better? Can I put that in that category, or is that a different category? I just need to know how to categorize
Mr. Chairman,
these things.
Sorry, Mr. Tierney. I just emailed all of y'all the link so you can view it too. In case it's small, we're trying to get it as big as possible, but you all have that in your emails now in case you want to view on your screen. But and then to your point, Dr. Robinson, there are already some things on there, so I don't know if it captures, what you're talking about now, but just what we should start doing that we're not currently doing, right? So I think, after this, we'll summarize it all into themes, so similar to what Ms. Vertakis did with the equity stuff and how y'all talked about what the barriers were, and then she put it into 4 themes. We'll do that afterwards. I think we're just trying to make sure that y'all surface things that perhaps you want your colleagues to hear as well, because we know public discussion is also important. So I think that's something that we had talked about, of just what do you want to start doing, what do you want to stop, and then what do you want to continue doing, as Mr. Barbieri said, for that order.
Okay, which one are we doing now? Start. Oh, what should we start doing?
Yes.
Oh, goodness. Okay. So I think that we need to start working with community-based organizations in a authentic partnership way to support parents and students, right? I think we need to redefine the word community so that we all know what we're talking about, because when I'm saying community, I mean one thing, and other people say community, I think they're talking about the business community. Well, I know some people are, but I think that we need to start with the understanding that all children can get smart if we give them engaging curriculum, enthusiastic teachers, and if we can get them to actively engage in their own education. And it's number 3 where we're really falling short, because I think we still continue to act as though children are supposed to be like internally motivated to learn or something. And I can promise you I had no internal motivation to learn. Mine was always external, right? And some children are not similarly blessed, right? And so is that, I think that's where we really miss things. So we need to have conversations about how you engage students and spread that, and also find ways to communicate with educators why all this stuff that we talk about up here is actually helpful for what is important to them, right? And we need to provide the adults with the support to do the things that we know would benefit students, so that it can be done with fidelity without them feeling any more overwhelmed than they already feel, right? Okay, so I'm gonna stop now, but I'll come up with more if you want.
That's fine. Ms. Whitfield?
Thank you so much. I guess we're just talking about START right now, so I'll just mention a few things on that. One of the frustrations I had with the last strategic plan is, as all of you know, I used to work in the school district, but not in instruction. And I always felt like, there's like a tiered system within the school system about, who's the most important for children's education. And And I would like to see in the next strategic plan a real ability for every single person who works in the school system to see how they contribute. Because I think everybody in this system contributes. We have, 20,000+ workers in this district, and it's important to me that they all understand how best to do their jobs to affect the outcome of the children and the success of children within the district. So, we're all working towards the same goal, and so I want our strategic plan to really say that. The other thing that I find would be I think a really interesting thing for us to look at, and I just want to mention this so that we can discuss it in future meetings, but there is a model that people who are involved in public health know from the CDC. It's called the whole student, whole child model that CDC has put together. It's been adopted by our Wellness Promotion Task Force many years ago as a part of the work that we do. And really what it does is it represents all of those different aspects of people who contribute to not only the education learning of the children, but also the public health needs of our students. And so I would love it if we would look at really focusing on the whole child as we go forward, because I think we do it. I think we have, I think we do actually work on that as a district. I think it's about the communication and showing everyone, again, how they tie in the work that they do, and really looking at the whole child and how we can make it so that all of these efforts that we do in the district are communicated to everyone, but also on some level equally represented. I think, we have put a really heavy focus on mental health, which is one of the components, and I love it. But I think we also have to think about physical activity with the children, nutrition, the community collaborations, parent and community involvement. All of those things are part of it, and I think it's a very interesting. So again, whole school, whole child model, thinking about a whole child at all their pieces of what makes their day successful. And then finally, one of the things that I have really thought is so important for this district, as you know, this is something that I've talked about many times, is our dual language programs. I put my daughter, who didn't speak Spanish, into a dual language program. She was there for 6 years. She's still in Spanish for Spanish speakers in her middle school. I think it's vital in this economy that we put efforts into dual language. I think we need to put our dollars behind it. I think it's something that should be marketed better. I think it's crucial for our children in a county where 1/3 of the people in the community speak Spanish and are of Hispanic origin. I think we really need to make sure that we're setting every child up for success. And so having the opportunities to do work on dual language so that every child has that ability to learn Spanish, even if they and also I know we've talked about Creole and there's been Mandarin conversations. Just having that ability to learn another language, I think, is really crucial, and I think it does a lot for their brains. And then I just want to mention really briefly at the end, as we're thinking whole student, whole child model, the whole child, I would really like us to always consider art and music in that aspect, because I think it's a really important thing about the development of the brain of the children. So if we're making a wish list of what we think makes a great kid and makes the education system wonderful, I think we have to renew our focus on arts and music in that whole child. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Whitfield. Mrs. Andrews?
Thank you. I would like to see us look at the next strategic plan to start looking at how we actually develop the budget for schools that have high levels of the subgroups that are really not making it, i.e. Your ESE population, your minority students in many of your predominantly black schools, your ELL, looking at those subgroups and looking at those schools that have a high number of those subgroups, and look at how we actually allocate money to each school. The calculations that we've used in the past are kind of generic, based on the school, with maybe Title I funding adding to those schools, but finding a way, working with the finance department, on how we can establish some new resources with curriculum, with human resources, a whole cadre of support for the schools that are most needy. And I'd like to see us try to put a budget package together on how that can be done, based on knowing where these students are. We know where they are. We know the issues in these subgroups, and we need to figure out how we can adjust our funding accordingly to provide the help in these areas. So I'd like for us to start looking at that, talking about how we can do that, and align it with the subgroups to provide these additional resources for success.
So I'd like to make a comment at this point too. I don't know, maybe I'm too simplified on this, but I believe that the reading is the key to everything. Whether it's graduation, it's postgraduate success, whatever. We're fortunate in Palm Beach County because we have some of the most talented teachers in the entire state, I believe, if not the country. We also have some that are superstars. I can give you an example of one of those. She comes to the meeting, she makes us all laugh, and that's Edith Pride at Boca Elementary School. We have superstar teachers that know how to teach children, especially children like at Boca L that come from families where they're, these kids are not English language speakers primarily, and they've had some unfortunate situations in their lives already when they get to school. We should be figuring out where we have those teachers, and those teachers should be teaching other teachers how we move these children to get them to read. I know, we have these ambassadors that you talked about earlier, but there are success stories in almost all of our schools where there is some teacher that stands out, especially when it comes to reading. If we're going to make a difference in this district, we have to make sure these kids are reading at grade level to the end of third grade. We've heard all of us say that, and I think the key is we need to find the right teachers that will take a child, no matter what color he is or what background he's from, and make sure that child can get what they need so that they start in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and by third grade, they can read on grade level without any problems. So hopefully we can identify those teachers and get them involved. I don't know, we call them master teachers, or we get these teachers to go into their schools and coach, but I don't know exactly. It's up to you all to figure that out, but I think we need to use the talent we have, a proven talent, to make sure that our kids are getting the education that they need. Mrs. Andrews?
I'd like for us to envision or start to establish an exchange program for teachers within the district itself. I know that we'd probably have to work with the unions to do this, but I'd like to see us find a way a way that we can utilize talents from within our areas. For instance, I'm in District 6, and I have a combination of all types of schools, and I'd like to see us find a way to use incentives, and we are already doing some of that, and moving the teachers around to high-performing teachers, teachers with their master's degrees, teachers with a lot of experience, and teachers with a proven record of moving student achievement to be able to help each other. Maybe the ambassadorship works, but I mean, to spend the time in maybe a school for 3 years or more, or a year, in an exchange program, so that they can demonstrate the talents necessary to move student achievement. So I'd like to see us work with how we can implement something like that by having a conversation with our unions, with HR, and looking around in the United States to see what kind of programs are like that. I bet it's out there somewhere and we just haven't looked at it. So I'd like to see us do that, especially with such a diverse district that we have here in Palm Beach County. We should be able to put something together like that that can give a different perspective of teachers from the different areas of our county, so they can help each other to learn and grow each day.
Dr. Robinson?
Okay, so we're still on the start, right? Where we start.
Yes.
Okay, so I just want to follow up on something that Mrs. Whitfield said. I want to say specifically that every employee should really see their role in accomplishing the mission, right? Like whatever that ends up being, or vision. I still can't get them straight. Whichever one it is, that they see how their work, helps accomplish that. The next thing is, as I mentioned before, we need to start discussing racial equity on a regular basis in every school and every department. And it should be, I think, led with data, right? Because I think that people don't really, they just know that, they mean well, right? And they don't see the data that says we're not doing so good, and hopefully there'll be a wake-up call to try to change our ways. I think that we need to start holding our mental health consultants accountable, because we don't yet. That's a whole thing. I think we need to recognize African American English as the language that it is, and we need to teach children to be bilingual with African American English and standard English. And then we need to set a goal that every child is trilingual. Because if their home language is standard American English, then I'm good with the goal being to be bilingual. But we have so many children whose home language is not standard American English. I think we set the goal to be trilingual. But first we have to acknowledge, for children whose home language is African American English, that part of our failure to teach children to read is that we are not acknowledging the language. It's not quite as much of a gap as if the home language was Creole or Portuguese or French or Spanish, but there's still a gap there, and we don't acknowledge it, and we allow our teachers to see them as dumb black kids, and therefore the expectations are low. We need to, how do I say this? So so part of this conversation has to be around the teachers who mean so well and love the children so much, right? And I just love you and I love you, but I don't want to hurt your feelings by stressing you out and making you learn this hard stuff, because that's a reality, right? And so I want them to love them, yes, of course, right? But love does not mean, cut them off at the knees, right? And so, but sometimes people don't sometimes see that. And just by way of example, one of my son's best friend's mom was a middle school teacher in our district, and she told me when they were in elementary school that this math is too hard. It's going to damage their self-esteem. Okay? So, no, it's teach them the math. It will help their self-esteem. Okay. I also think that we really need to do a real push to more, to use in our instructional material dollars to pay teachers to write virtual books. Now, this has been an ongoing thing that I brought up, and there's been impediments to that, and I understand that. But just imagine how cool it would be, since everything's online anyway, right? That we take that money, we pay teachers like over the summer to write really rich. It's also a fantastic professional development activity, right? And then we could use it, and it could be written so that all of our children see themselves, not the children in Texas, right? The children in Palm Beach County can see themselves, right? So that's one of the things I think we should start doing, is fighting that fight, wherever it exists. And then the last thing that I wrote for the moment is we have a lot of educators that have promoted themselves out of the classroom, right? I think that those educators should make a commitment to go into the classroom, I would say once a week or once every 2 weeks or whatever, so that they're like assigned and they're providing support and demonstrating, since they're so awesome, they got promoted out of the classroom, right? They should be able to be outstanding exemplars, especially like for new teachers, right? So I think that's something that we can work on that would hopefully benefit children and the educators that are in front of them every day. That's it for now.
Ms. McQuinn?
All right, I'm coming back to my reading thing. So, barring English being a second language, and I will refer to Dr. Robinson's and I don't remember the term you used, but I'm going to use a black language. All of this is going to roll into one thing, I promise you. I've been trying to put my thoughts together here with this. I think we should just have one goal. One goal. Every single one of our students, unless they come to us not speaking English in the third grade. By the end of third grade, we don't say we're going to increase by a certain amount. No. Every single one can read on grade level. And then everything else comes out of that. What do the communities say their kids need? All of that comes out of that. Sure, we have social, emotional, all of the whole child learning, but it comes out of a belief that every single kid can learn to read, and we have a few years to get them there to make up for reasons why they didn't come to us with that ability. Now, I'm not quite through with this whole reading thing. I've been writing all my stuff down. So, I'm going to go move past elementary level, because you know I'm high on the reading there, but let's go to fourth grade, so we get through third grade. We could start now, because we can't start, the kids who come to us next year in kindergarten can't start in third grade. But we can take our fourth graders next year and say, we don't have lower level classes anymore in content areas. At the middle school level, certainly at the high school level, everybody's in higher level classes. And we get the comment, well, they can't read. No, well then you know what? Then we put our money to have somebody read to the kids, because I guarantee you they can understand the content of the course. It just all starts with reading and saying, why aren't they there? And we make it happen. And I know we can do that. I simply know we can do this. I feel very passionate about it. And then also, I realize that this is not a start. Okay, that's a start, my goal about reading. Put them in higher level classes, give them the reading support that they need. So that's a start, and then my third grade thing. Okay, and then I don't know how to start this. I can give you lots of barriers, but we do have to have a teacher-student match, whatever that means. I'm done for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McQuinn. Mrs. Andrews?
I do believe we have to have a true relationship with our communities, especially our parents and our neighborhoods. I think in doing the strategic plan, we want to get stakeholder input, and then you're done and you're gone. I think what we need to do is make sure we put some kind of component in place, not just for teachers, but for administrators, just for everybody. Our bus drivers, our custodians, they all come from our neighborhoods, and we need to establish a way to find out where the children live and where they're coming from, and begin to do a partnership with the community for which our children come from to go to school each day. Many times, you go to the school building and then they go home and they don't see their teacher. So I think it's about making sure that we can build some strong relationships with the community. When you think about our African-American boys, our black boys, Brother Carl comes here, every school board meeting asking, well, what can we do in the community to help our boys who, when you look at the out-of-school suspension and you look at the reading, when you look at the attendance and all the issues, you know, they rank high up there. We've got leaders within our community. We've got to find them and make sure that they can help us so we can know where the children are coming from, getting to know their parents, getting to know their community by attending events and activities within their community so that you can come together. So we have to figure out how we bridge that, because it's easy to say, well, they go to school and they go home, and the parents, it's their responsibility to do what's what. Parents want to know that you truly care about their children. So with this strategic plan, I would like to see a component, a community parental component there, a real true component where we really have some really action items that we can show that we're really out there making a difference in the communities for where those children live and come from. And they can see us sometimes, not just in, you know, the 8 to 7:30 to 3 or 2:30 or whatever, and it's over with.
Okay, since there seems to be a lull here, we'll move on to the next, which would be, what things should we stop doing? Who's first on this one? Go ahead, Dr. Robinson.
Can we please stop talking to the children about the FSA? Talking to children about the FSA. We beat the crap out of the children. They get all stressed out, lose sleep, pee on themselves and stuff because we stress them out about the doggone test. Now, okay, so I'm just going to take a personal privilege and tell you this in case you don't know, because I say it whenever I get to. My med school class at Howard University, okay, Howard had been, the med school was criticized like 3 years or something before we started there for having this higher than the national average failure rate on the national boards, right? I could tell you that my class was the first med school class in this nation's history for 100% to pass Part 2 of the national board on the first try. They did not talk to us about the national boards. I'm sure they revamped the curriculum. I'm fairly certain of that. They taught us how to be physicians, right? But they didn't talk about the test except to say register and show up on Saturday, right? So don't get it twisted. I'm not saying don't prepare the children. I want them to pass a doggone test. We're in this high-stakes world. But we don't have to talk to children about the test. And we can stop saying to adults, well, you know, it's a Title I school. Because what message does that say? We don't expect them to do well. We understand what the statistics say. We get that we have to, if we're going to talk about equity, we need to make up for whatever blessings they didn't come to the table with. We get that. But we need to stop communicating stress to children and failure to adults. Thank you.
Mrs. Andrews?
We've got to stop placing teachers who need support in low-performing schools.
Mrs. McQuinn? Ms. Brill? Mrs. Whitfield?
I was just clapping about that,
Okay.
too.
Is it my turn?
Is that
Yes.
you, Mrs. Whitfield? Go ahead, yes.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to say, I'd like to stop getting distracted from our goals by changing and always adding new things. I'm hopeful that when this strategic plan is built, that it'll create the guardrails for us to really focus on the most important things. Like, I agree with everyone on reading. That's one of the ones I want to continue as well. But I do think it's very difficult to focus on that when we're constantly giving teachers and staff new tasks and changing the rules. So I'd like us to really just focus on the things that we choose, whatever we choose during this time, and really let everyone get their work done on it so we can see some real gains. Thank you.
Ms. McQuinn?
I've been thinking about this for a long time. I would like to stop putting career academies at schools that are there because we know students are applying to some academies because they don't want to go to their home school. So I should say, academies that are outside the boundaries of the school. And that's a whole conversation down the line because there's a lot of money involved in that. So I'm not saying don't have career academies. I'm saying they're only for your students or we don't put money into them.
Mrs. Andrews?
Mr. Byrd may not like me today, but we've got to stop using the calculations that we've used over the years for the budget for especially those schools that truly need help. We've got to begin to identify where the children are in the particular schools and develop calculations with our funding to make sure that we can meet the needs of those children at the schools where help is needed. When you kind of look at some schools, they have heavy-duty PTAs, you got community involvements raising funds, and that's all good stuff. I love that. I have that in my district. But you have so many struggling schools where when I'm looking at these kids, these students on this list that's not making it, I know where they are, and I know they don't get too much more than what these other schools get, and maybe a few extra dollars in title funds. So we're going to have to begin to look at how we can strategically look at how we budget for the children that truly need help, to get them the resources, as well as even the hiring of the teachers. I mean, you know, we recruit, and people come to Palm Beach County and they all want to go to an A-rated school and they want this and that. We've got to put some initiatives in place to get the best talent, the resources, the monies, everything to go where it's so much needed. And then I think you're going to get great teachers in those other places anyway. But we've got to make sure we put something in place to do it for these children who are suffering and who can't make it to the next level. So we've got to really have that discussion.
All right, the things we should continue doing, that we're currently doing? Mrs. Andrews?
I think we've really done a great job with the mental health, the SEL programs that we have, social and emotional learning, and the mental health counselors in our schools. Thank goodness we had the referendum that made a difference, and that's a big deal because not just with the COVID and the pandemic, but this is something we've needed forever. So I think we have to continue the programs necessary to support children so that they can be socially and emotionally well and their mental health can be intact.
Mrs. Whitfield?
Thank you. So one of the things that I really struggled with on this is that I see valid uses for every initiative that we have. And that's why I kind of wanted to know what the end point was, because looking at them, they all seem so important. So hopefully we can narrow this list down, but things that I really want to continue, as I mentioned, the reading on grade level I think is huge. Cultural competence, I'm very proud of the work that we're doing on that and the way we're spreading it through the system. I think that's huge. Equity access work. I really love pre-K, and I love that we've put funding into it. I love the community partnerships, especially with the Early Learning Coalition, so I want to focus on that. The SEL work, and then I added onto the list where we had written the district culture of respect and trust. I know that's been mentioned also tonight, but I think, you know, a lot of the issues in this system can come down to whether or not people believe we're telling the truth. And, you know, I feel like I'm in a very privileged position because I can call people and ask them, you know, and I can find out if I believe the district is telling the truth. And by and large, I think our staff is extremely respectful and, you know, I trust them, you know, implicitly. But I think we need to build that culture so that the rest of the system believes that leadership is doing the best job that they can. So I think we need to really make that a focus of this upcoming strategic plan is how do we as a system be as transparent as possible and continue to build that culture so that people believe that this district is doing the best job that they can and that people are you know, worthy of their trust. Thank you.
Mrs. Andrews?
I'd like for us to continue to hold when we're having budget cuts, hold and not cut school base, materials, human resources, whatever is needed at the school. I think we should hold on and not cut there, and if we have to cut, it would have to be at the district level. And if necessary, we have to readjust ourselves here at the district so that we can go out and help the schools. But I think we should continue to make sure that the school center is the priority, because it's where the children are and the teachers and the people who make it happen for learning. So I think we definitely want to continue that model.
Dr. Robinson?
Thank you. I hope that we will continue the behavioral health professionals as the first line in the whole mental health, social-emotional support. And the other thing, I'm trying to figure out how to say this. So it actually nauseates me sometimes, but I do think that we should continue the self-promotion, right? So communications does a great job of saying, we're so wonderful in all these different ways. And that's necessary, even though it makes vomit come up in my mouth, okay? So, but I think some of that needs to be more honest. Some of that communication needs to be like, we're trying to do this. We're doing the best we can, whatever it is we're talking about, because the feedback that I get is other people find it as disingenuous, and they see it as we just push all this positive stuff and we don't tell the truth, because they know it's not all rainbows and unicorns and stuff, right? So I think we need to continue the self-promotion, but try to be a little more authentic about the struggle. Like when we get to the strategic plan, so let's say we say it is our goal for 100% of children to be reading on grade level by 3rd grade. Then we say that, we promote that, and we say, but we need you. This is hard work, whatever it is. But I'm just saying, our messaging has to be more authentic.
Thank you, Doc. Mrs. Whitfield?
I'm actually okay. I'll speak when we get to the other one. Thank you.
Mrs. Andrews?
I'm back on the community again. I think we need to continue, all of us need to continue to be out in the community, to be a part of our educational advisory committees, to visit our community organizations. We have a lot of sororities and fraternities that help in our community, especially with the groups that we're talking about. We have to continue to work with programs like the HEC, Hispanic Education Coalition, and all of these different entities that's out there in our community. We've got to be on the ground and be visible, and not just at the time for the strategic plan. It needs to be an ongoing thing. And my second continue is to recruit at historical black schools and continue to hiring incentives and working with our own community to find the talent that we have right here in Palm Beach County that can come in and help us to get the necessary tools and human resources needed to help all of the children from the standpoint of instructional and non-instructional. We need to know who the people are in our community that look like the children that we're talking about in these subgroups that can come in here and help us out. And we've got to go and find them. They're not coming to us. We've got to go find them.
Okay. Mr. Tierney, would you like to continue?
Yes, sir. So our next steps will be equity workshop with Ms. Furtakis. So everyone signed up for an individual one-to-one meeting with her prior to the workshop, which is a week from yesterday, 6 days from now. That will be a root cause analysis that will be kind of embedded on our current strategic plan, and then the data that Mr. Howard presented today. So you'll reflect on that as you go through a root cause analysis with her, and then that will drive our equity workshop on Tuesday. We're going to formally kick off that stakeholder engagement process. We wanted to go through that with the board. I mentioned we did start that with staff now, but we'll get feedback on the start, stop, continue from schools, from communities, from parents, from students. We'll complete the internal needs assessment that Chief started, which is a little more detailed to give ourselves authentic feedback to help guide us to our next plan. And then the steering committee, which we touched on today. Dr. Fenoy will speak to you in greater detail in one-to-ones next week. That meeting will be scheduled for the end of the month. And then our next strategic plan workshop will be on April 7th.
Dr. Robinson?
I want to add one more thing. I know I'm out of order, but I think this is a continue doing, because I don't really know where we are. We need to make sure that we, I think, expand the academic tutors, because I think the academic tutors are not only a good way to help with the economy, all right, especially in, more disadvantaged communities, but also it's a way for these young people to come in and see if they like teaching, and then the school administrators can see if they like them in this role as teacher support, and then we'd have to get Dr. LaCava to figure out how to pay for them to go to college and get their degree in exchange for them teaching in our schools for whatever period of time. But I think it's a pipeline, and it's a pipeline from the community, not somebody being imported from somewhere. And they're also tried and tested, like they know what they're getting into, right? If they become a teacher, so.
Mrs. Andrews?
And I didn't get a chance to put this one in at start. I'd like for us to start utilizing our buildings on Saturday. In some of the neighborhoods where children have nowhere to go on Saturdays, we should be able to find some kind of support and partnership with the community again, to be able to open the schools up, the libraries up, so that they can get on the computers. And I think you would find people from that community that could work with the school district to really build a partnership where we could actually help them to improve. I know we're looking at extended summer school and tutorials and academic tutors, but we have a building that sits from weekend to week out on the weekends, and nobody's using it unless you're getting ready for the FSA, and it should not be just for that. It should be able to be used.
Mrs. Whitfield?
Thank you. I'm sorry, I wanted to add one into the other category. I was looking at some of the things that we have on here, and one of them jumped out at me, which was the leadership pathways. And it made me realize that, some of these things I feel like we've done a pretty good job of accomplishing and setting up the goals. So I'd be curious from staff to let us know as we go forward if we're in a good enough place for some of these things that they can just be taken off the list. So not that I want to end that work, but just that we don't need to, prioritize it as much. Thanks.
Mr. Tierney?
I'd like to thank the board for participating in this exercise. It's been a long meeting, but we appreciate the authentic feedback, and we'll organize that in assistance with to move forward. Mr. Board Chair, thank you for facilitating that exercise, and this concludes the workshop.
Thank you.
I just want to take a moment to, again, thank the board for their participation, but I also would like to take a moment to thank staff. Even though I was not here at the development of the strategic plan we're currently under, it is clear, even though all of our goals aren't met, the staff in this district has worked very, very hard to get us to this point. And so based on this feedback and all the feedback we're going to collect, I'm just excited and that we're going to make some major changes. I think I would just say to the board publicly, for a person like me who has been through a lot of change, my entire career has been about change. I've changed high schools, changed areas. I just need the board to understand that it's going to be a challenge, and people are going to call you. And so if we're going to be a governance team through this process, we have to be clear on this, that as the change happens, people can't call you to be the scapegoat when things get rough. And so we're going to have to work together on that. So thanks to everyone for this work. And Mr. Tierney, thank you for your time. And Ms. Villavicencio, I can say it correctly.
Hey, only took 2.5 years, Dr. Fenoy.
I'm growing.
Culture change.
I'm trying my best. But thank you, guys. And Mr. Chairman, this ends our workshops for the day.
Thanks. Ms. Villavicencio, I hope you all have a nice night, too.
It's inclusive. Y'all.
Thanks. We need a motion to adjourn the workshop. Motion by Mrs. Andrews, seconded by Dr. Robinson. All in favor, Opposed, motion carries. Mrs. Whitfield, you still there? 6-0. We need,
No, I'm here, Mr. Barbieri. I would also like to adjourn.
I'm sorry, Mrs. Whitfield, I don't understand what you said.
I said I'm still here. I would also like to adjourn. Thank you.
Okay.